Placeholder. Unable to retrieve it from http://latashtab.com/a381/ from Becoming a Superman to Becoming Invincible's Chapter 101. The request to http://ap/reader get failed with a network error 21. Chapter 102. Aftermath. On the outskirts of Warsaw, Poland, Nick Fury and a few others sat on the grass outside the Quinjet. They were gathered around a portable projector, watching clip after clip of Superman spread across the internet. It had been an hour since the nuclear detonation, and the city's cheers had not stopped. A place that usually moved at an easy pace had erupted into the kind of fevered celebration you see in Rio during Carnival. Fiery, euphoric, with no room for even a trace of gloom. None of that jubilation touched Nick Fury. He felt leaden and hollow. That a nuclear attack and its impossible undoing had unfolded while the full story only reached him via a viral post infuriated him. Even worse, Hydra, his personal obsession, the enemy he'd been willing to upend the world to take down, had been neutralized by someone else entirely. And then there was Superman. Fury had watched the footage of Superman flying out of the mushroom cloud, dispersing it like mist, dozens of times. He still couldn't reconcile how something that powerful could exist on Earth. Even his greatest trump card, Captain Marvel, whose single strike could unleash the energy of multiple nuclear blasts, suddenly seemed insufficient against a being like that. The only small comfort came from Tony Stark's involvement. Stark had sunk an airborne aircraft carrier. Fury clung to that fact like a talisman, glad at least that someone he respected had made a move. He sat on the lawn, face darkened by the evening light, rubbing his old pager as if by polishing it he could will away the chaos. Hawkeye didn't understand Fury's mood and was in surprisingly high spirits. How many times are we going to watch this? 100? Why is it still on repeat? Isn't it a good thing Hydra's conspiracy got crushed? Relax, Fury. The crisis is over. We're off duty. He gestured toward the distant city. Anybody want to join the celebration? After all that, don't we deserve a break? Coulson raised a hand. If anyone's pouring, I'll take a glass of Polish vodka. No, Fury stood up sharply, shoved the pager into his pocket. No vodka, no carnival. We still have a mess to clean up. Hill, call people you trust. We need to take back S.H.I.E.L.D. His voice was hard and final, like someone preparing to launch an operation that would decide fates. Maria Hill sat on the grass, expression calm as water as she handed him a tablet. Fury, I didn't say anything earlier because you were so focused on Superman. Half an hour ago, an organization calling itself the Rising Tide obtained and published the personnel files of every S.H.I.E.L.D. employee from unknown channels, she said. Not only did they reveal Hydra infiltration, many agents were shown to have committed irregular or unauthorized acts. The online uproar got ugly. The Security Council has issued a notice. They're detaining us and disbanding S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury stared at her. What do you mean, disbanded? Fury, Hill said evenly, there is no S.H.I.E.L.D. anymore. He snatched the tablet, feeling the floor drop out from under him. Do you have any idea how access to those files works? At least 2 people with alpha-level clearance need to authenticate with iris scans simultaneously. I know, Hill replied, but the files are out. The decision stands. We can investigate how they were taken after the detentions are over. Fury sank back down onto the grass. Numb. Motherfucker. 3 days passed and the world spun into a new shape. Those 72 hours produced more upheaval than the past decade. S.H.I.E.L.D. was officially disbanded. The International Security Council underwent an immediate reshuffle. The U.S. military pulled its remaining forces out of Asia overnight, correcting a previous linguistic loophole that had allowed them to claim they were only withdrawing troops from Afghanistan rather than the whole continent. Leon, who'd been tied up with cross-border operations and handling the men in black, had postponed settling scores until Hydra was dealt with. Now, the U.S. military backtracked, but not before losing an aircraft carrier, an act they later buried in classified meetings, insisting publicly that no casualties occurred. The next day, they held a quiet press conference, blaming the sinking on an exercise error. The global hunt for Hydra commenced in earnest. No government could abide a cabal that had toyed with nuclear weapons and nearly dragged the world into annihilation. Tracking Hydra became a priority, and the most visible forces in the hunt were a cadre of women in black suits who moved like shadows in Iron Man, who streaked across the sky in dramatic displays. The women had intercepted an airborne aircraft carrier, arrested Pierce, and rescued diplomatic teams from several nations. When they struck, entire Hydra bases seemed to collapse with barely a trace left behind. They were elusive. State agencies launched investigations and often came up empty. Some of those agencies, upon discovering uncomfortable truths, simply stopped digging and tacitly accepted the presence of these men in black. Rumors flourished. Some called the men in black Tony Stark's angels, pointing out they used armor exclusive to Iron Man. Others said they were a group of people who'd been persecuted by Hydra and had united out of vengeance. Their first public act, driving their spears straight at Hydra, looked like the settling of a long, personal score. Whatever the truth, the Men in Black and Iron Man had become global names. Another organization calling itself the Tide also rose into public consciousness from the Hydra fallout. Governments rounded up members, recruited some, imprisoned others. The few who remained underground went silent. Their publication of S.H. Shield's files became, in many ways, their swan song. But no single element of the crisis eclipsed the arrival of Superman. In the days after Hydra's defeat, the internet filled with hundreds of millions of new posts about him. His presence began to ripple through every layer of society, from officials to refugees, and spawned dozens of online movements and schools of thought. The two largest camps were the supporters and the opponents. Supporters were largely people Superman had saved. Opponents were a motley group driven by fear, ideology, or opportunism. For 3 days, the two sides tore into each other online in battles that felt apocalyptic. Comments and communities went up in virtual smoke, a century-long war in miniature that nearly annihilated swaths of the cyber world. Smaller factions split off. The Adventists, the Saviors, the Supreme God faction, and darker splinter groups like the Original Sin faction, the Dictatorship Camp, and the Extinctionists. By the end of the third day, the supporters held a clear advantage. Numbers favored them, but a more startling factor was active retaliation from the Warsaw survivors, some of whom had been rescued by Superman. They hacked into opponents' accounts, tracked them down across borders, and in several instances forced confrontations in the real world. The day after being challenged, several vocal opponents posted confessions. "I will always support Superman," and their IPs resolved to locations like hospital wards. The opponents quieted for now. They were waiting for another day to fight. Compared with the 3 days of online battles between the two camps, the official media had united into a chorus of praise. Leon was watching a KNKV TV report from Los Angeles. A month ago, that station had subtly suggested Superman might be a dictator who could oppress people worldwide. Now the same familiar female anchor smiled from the screen and said, "Superman's arrival is a godsend. He foiled Hydra's world destruction plan, saved tens of millions of lives, and is a light of human civilization. Undoubtedly, he will be the beacon of a new era and our closest friend. We've invited a renowned sociologist to give a deeper analysis." A man with a placard reading Francis cleared his throat and began. He spoke of Superman's kindness in the comics and compared it to the man who had stood alone against a nuclear blast 3 days ago. He argued that the real-life Superman must have been raised by parents as kind as the Kents, and concluded that Superman was absolutely righteous and benevolent. Leon clicked his tongue. Same people, same stage. How could they say things now that were the exact opposite of what they'd been saying a month ago? Didn't the boomerang coming back to hit their faces embarrass them? He hadn't thought his joke with Tony would actually come true, unless Superman really did start showing a soft, kindly public face. Otherwise, the press would keep fawning, shaping him into an icon of ultimate goodness. If Superman had been weaker, that would be praise that smothered, flattery as coercion, but he could take nuclear blasts, so this was a different kind of moral pressure. Leon didn't accept that sort of imposed morality. Tony, on the other hand, might enjoy it. He'd called several times in the last 3 days, repeatedly declaring his envy, jealousy, and resentment at Superman's popularity. Superman is the embodiment of justice? Shirley came into the living room, reading the headline as she came in from school. "Are you watching the news again?" Everyone's been saying the same thing these past few days. At school, on the street, It's everywhere. She jogged a few steps and sat beside Leon. It's all flattering, she said, frowning. But something feels off. It's like they're trying to put you, Brother Leon, on such a high pedestal that you can never come down. You're absolutely right. Leon rubbed the top of Shirley's head, surprised she'd noticed. None of it comes from a good place. If even Shirley could see it, the spin had been over the top. Media across the globe were boosting Superman's public image with exaggerated praise, trying to shape his self-image. They wanted him to see himself as an almost sacred figure. If his morality or strength were in doubt, such adulation could crush him. Now that he could survive a nuclear blast, the danger was that praise would become moral coercion. Leon rejected that. Tony might revel in it. He'd been jealous and talkative about it ever since. Shirley brightened at Leon's agreement, feeling a little older. Then she frowned. Then why do you keep watching the news? Leon couldn't tell her he watched for entertainment. He cleared his throat. I wasn't watching the news. I was waiting for your Uncle Tony's live broadcast. It started. Let's watch it. Tony was due to appear at a Senate hearing about illegally possessing armored suits. Leon wasn't worried. The hearing was largely ceremonial. The Rising Tide's list of Hydra collaborators had named many senators, and the authorities were busy rooting out traitors and stabilizing things. Tony's fame was worldwide. This was more about giving him legal cover to make armor than actual prosecution. Leon switched the projection to the live feed. The chamber was full. Mr. Tony Stark, how do you respond to the accusation that you've been illegally possessing weaponized armor? A senator asked. Tony rubbed his forehead. A weapon? Really? How could you think that? It's just a high-tech prosthetic I developed, he went on. You know I was half broken after Afghanistan. I need prosthetics to help me move. Ordinary, reasonable things. I don't see the problem. Laughter ran through the room. Tony stood there in a short-sleeved knit shirt that hugged his chest. He looked fit enough to be a bodybuilding contestant, so the claim of disability struck many as absurd. The senator smiled weakly and shifted to the next question. Former S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury requested a temporary halt to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s dissolution before he was imprisoned, and he suggested you take over and reorganize S.H.I.E.L.D. Was his recommendation the result of a deal, or because you possess armored suits? Tony paused. I don't know. Maybe because my father helped found S.H.I.E.L.D., but again, what you call battle suits are really just prosthetics to help me move. The senator frowned and was about to press when another official cleared his throat, signaling to move on. There's currently an international group calling themselves the Men in Black who have been seen using armor similar to yours in public. Is Stark Industries selling weapons to terrorists? Tony sneered. Absurd. To my knowledge, the Men in Black belong to Superman. I had dealings with Superman in Sokovia, he added. If the Men in Black used suits like mine, maybe Superman stole my tech. As a taxpayer, I'd like the government to pursue copyright issues with Superman, and if you consider the Men in Black a terrorist organization, you can order him to disband it. When Tony finished, he leaned back and winked at Pepper in the audience. A stunned silence followed. Even the whisperers stopped. Some senators at the dais looked pale. What had they just heard? The Men in Black were Superman's operatives? Even those who had suspected a connection had never dared say so publicly. Iron Man had said it outright and asked the government to go after Superman. The senator who had asked the original question felt his vision dim, his head buzzed. He'd only meant to ask about battle suits. How had this turned into an accusation against Superman? Leaving the chamber after that would be terrifying. Who knew how fanatics who worshipped Superman might react? He stammered, "We had no such intention. Please, forgive me. That was standard procedure. We never doubted your stance." His hand shook as he brought the gavel down. This hearing is adjourned. Stop the live broadcast. The feed cut to commercials. Leon and Shirley exchanged looks. Did Uncle Tony just expose your connection with the sisters? Shirley blinked. Leon tilted his head, thinking. He had indeed agreed to Tony's leak earlier, but he still warned Shirley, now you know how impossible it is to keep anything from Uncle Tony. His mouth is like a public bus, Shirley said, making a chugging motion with her hands. People get on and off all the time. Don't expect him to keep secrets. Never trust his stinking mouth. Shirley mimed, zipping her lips with both hands. I know. I'll never tell Uncle Tony any secrets. Chapter 104. Rebuilding S-Shield. After the hearing, Tony had won permission to privately own armored weaponry. He didn't relax. If anything, he got busier, at least 10 times busier than he had been when he called himself a playboy. The long-planned retrofit of the airborne fortress finally began in earnest. He hired teams of men in black at premium rates, and the carrier seemed to change shape by the day. At the same time, he threw himself into hunting Hydra. Whenever a lead came in on a Hydra base, Tony was on the front line. The leads were, in truth, mostly the work of Leon. After he used his super hearing to triangulate the locations of Hydra cells, he passed everything to the men in black and let them clear the list. Tony followed in their wake. In a few days, only 3 small to medium Hydra outposts were left clinging on. They'd tried to shield themselves with lead plating to foil Superman's X-ray vision, but Superman had super hearing too. Tony's road to revenge was almost over. What gnawed at him more now, though, was S-Shield. After Hydra's betrayal, Director Fury and his closest aides had been taken into custody by the Security Council. Once their monitoring period ended, it would be extremely hard for them to rebuild the organization. Fury decided to gamble everything on one last move. He threw his support to the only person he could still stomach trusting, Tony Stark. Fury pushed Tony as the new director and vouched for his record, insisting the world still needed an agency like S-Shield. The newly appointed Security Council, after weighing Tony's background, his transformation after Afghanistan, and his extraordinary talent and reputation, agreed. A week earlier, the council had extended an olive branch. Would Tony be willing to rebuild S-Shield? This time, they stressed, no Hydra infiltration allowed. To help him decide rationally, they gave him temporary authorization to review S-Shield's confidential files. Reading through those files for days, Tony slowly realized S.H.I.E.L.D. had been necessary. Superpowered individuals, global anomalies, ancient high-energy relics, there were threats recorded in those files he'd never dreamed of. New abnormal situations cropped up daily, and the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had been the ones to contain them, to limit the panic and preserve ordinary people's perceptions of the world. Tony had to admit the agency had served a purpose, but he couldn't ignore what else he'd found. Under Fury's stewardship, with Hydra in the mix, S.H.I.E.L.D. had also committed reprehensible acts. That made the decision heavier. After more days of weighing pros and cons, Tony decided he needed to talk to Leon. When he tracked Leon down, Leon was sketching a 3-dimensional map of a mountainous region. "What are you drawing? A Himalayan travel plan?" Tony asked. "More or less," Leon said, putting down his brush. "There's an area I can't see through, some sort of enclave. I think mages live there. I might pay them a visit." Tony peered at the map. "Mages? This world's got mages? There's no record of that in the S.H.I.E.L.D. files. Are you sure?" "There are a lot of things you can't see," Leon said. "Could be a lead-plated military base instead of a coven." "After Hydra, everything secret got leaded over," Tony said. "There are even TV shows now about the weird stuff ordinary people are putting in lead at home. You won't believe it. One family checked under their daughter's bed while she was away and found a stack of Superman fan magazines in a lead box." Tony bent over laughing. He rapped Leon on the back. "See? Your supervision's useless, Leon. Those magazines' owners absolutely don't want you to know what she's reading." Leon scowled. "You came all this way just to talk about fan magazines?" Leon demanded. "Cough, no. Tony wiped his eyes. "Honestly, I'm here because of S.H.I.E.L.D." He summarized his dilemma. S.H.I.E.L.D. still had a purpose, and if he agreed to rebuild it, he could coordinate with Leon's Men in Black to handle extraterrestrial crises, S.H.I.E.L.D. to handle internal threats. What did Leon think? Leon gave him a look. "You're sure you'd run S.H.I.E.L.D. to deal with internal threats? Come on, you're the biggest internal threat to Earth." "That's prejudice," Tony protested. "The last carrier crash was an accident." "Accidents happen everywhere," Leon said. "And if you've already decided, why ask me?" "I needed to tell someone," Tony admitted. "I feel better after talking to you." Tony told Leon he'd found backing and could move forward. Leon sneered. "Then I won't help S.H.I.E.L.D." "Fine," Tony said. "It doesn't have to be called S.H.I.E.L.D. We could call it The Avengers, Leon supplied, rolling his eyes. Tony had seen that name in Fury's files before. It sounded right. A group that avenged the world, maybe knowing such a force existed, would make would-be villains think twice. If you want my help, Leon continued, you give me the Tesseract from a SHIELD facility to study, for 100 years. Tony blinked. The Tesseract, level 10 stuff, he muttered. At that moment, Leon's electronic wrist ring chimed. When he turned it, Natasha projected into the air, urgent and grim. Leon, we found some files. You need to see these. They flew to a Hydra base in Siberia, cutting into the frozen permafrost. Natasha led them to a dust-covered control room, the old instruments long out of use. She withdrew a box of yellowed videotapes and fed one into the player. The monitor, its screen streaked with static, came to life and started to play footage from years past. Leon guessed with a cold sinking feeling that the tape showed Howard Stark. Tony watched beside him, curiosity brightening his features, an expression that, as Leon knew, would harden into rage within seconds. The video began to play. It was grainy, surveillance-style footage from a fixed camera under a street lamp. The scene made Tony uneasy. He glanced at the tape's label, December 16th, 1991, the date their parents had died in a car accident. Tony's chest tightened. He frowned. This road, I remember it. On the screen, a car suddenly careened out of control, slamming into a leafy roadside tree. Flames licked the hood almost at once. A motorcycle skidded to a stop beside the wreck. The driver of the car weakly pushed the door open and crawled out. It was Howard Stark, old, badly injured, bleeding. Help, please, save my wife and child, he begged toward the noise of the motorcycle, his voice thin with pain. The motorcyclist walked straight up and grabbed Howard by the hair, hauling him up. Howard's eyes widened as he recognized the man. Sergeant Barnes? The man was James Bucky Barnes, the man who had been presumed dead in World War II. Howard's face registered a rush of understanding. If Bucky was here, there was no way he, his wife, and his child would survive. As Howard's pleading died away, a terrible, resigned calm settled over him. Maria, stirring in the passenger seat, croaked her husband's name. Bucky didn't hesitate. He punched Howard in the face several times until he blacked out, then shoved him back into the driver's seat. Moving around to Maria's side, he reached through the window and clamped a hand around her throat. Maria choked and rattled. She raised a bundle, a tiny wrapped infant, toward him, desperate. Please, save him, she coughed. After 10 seconds, Maria's eyes glazed over and her arms slumped. The baby began to cry as the temperature in the car fell with the bodies beside him. Bucky's face stayed cold and impassive. He grabbed the infant from Maria's lap, unwrapped the swaddling, looped the cloth twice around the small neck, and pulled with both hands. The crying cut off short. The baby's face darkened and went limp. Tossing the infant out the passenger window as if discarding trash, Bucky staged the perfect accident, a car explosion after a crash, a baby thrown free at the wrong moment but strangled by the swaddling. No obvious signs of sabotage. Hydra agents would handle the scene and the surveillance records. His job was only to kill. The footage ended there. Natasha shut off the monitor, pulled the tape out, and stared at the people beside her with tense lips. Tony had gone pale and then hot with fury. He was breathing hard. Leon's eyes were bright red, radiating lethal intent. Tony had just watched his parents murdered. Hate filled his mind, pouring out through his wide eyes. Lon, who had long been ready to avenge Howard and Maria, felt his anger ignite as he watched his adoptive mother and himself smothered by Barnes. It was a raw, combustive rage in both of them. Where is he? Tony hissed through clenched teeth. Without a word, Leon rose, his super hearing and supervision working at full tilt. From billions of strands of incoming data, he locked onto Bucky's location with surgical certainty. Hydra's African base. He's guarding a man named Baron Strucker. Leon didn't waste words. He grabbed Tony's arm, his biofield engaged, and the two of them vanished from Siberia. Half a minute later, they breached Hydra's nuclear-proof compound outside Johannesburg. The gate, 2.8 meters of reinforced steel, exploded inward as if a bomb had detonated. Dozens of tons of iron flew and shattered. Leon and Tony strode through the gap, their movements astonishingly synchronized. Left foot, right foot, one cape fluttering, the other's armor hissing on landing. Sunlight blasted in behind them like two angels of punishment parting the gates. Hydra operatives, already terrified of the man in red and blue and the armored genius, scattered. Tony's repulsors and Leon's heat vision made short work of them. Heat beams carved corridors, repulsor blasts swept like a plow. The base was cleared within minutes. Baron Strucker threw up his hands and began to beg. "I surrender, Mr. Superman, Mr. Iron Man." His words outran Tony's repulsor charge, but not Leon's heat vision. Mid-sentence, Strucker was split cleanly in two. By the time the two men reached the inner chamber, only three figures remained. Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, slumped and strapped beside an old brainwashing machine, his eyes empty and dead, and the two who had come for vengeance. Bucky's gaze was vacant. He had no orders from his handler. He didn't move. Tony's right-hand repulsor hummed and charged, aimed at the Winter Soldier's head. "It's him," Tony said flatly. "Legally," Leon said almost quietly, "he's been brainwashed. He may not bear criminal responsibility. In a court of law." Tony's hand faltered. The glowing charge on the repulsor dimmed just enough to show the fight inside him. Then two searing red beams shot from Leon's eyes and struck Bucky's head. "But morally," Tony finished, his voice harsh and small, "this is a blood debt." Leon turned away. "Nothing else matters. This is personal." Bucky's head came free. His torso fell and slumped to the floor. Tony stood over the remains for a long time, speechless, staring at what was left of the man who had killed his parents. Finally, with a long, exhausted sigh, he discharged his repulsors and blew the body apart into unrecognizable pieces. He did not know if what they had done was right. He only knew he had to stand with Leon, right or wrong. They would act together, always on the same side. "I'll start forming the Avengers when we get back," Tony said after a moment, voice steadier. "You have to join." Another 2 days passed. The Men in Black had finally wiped out Hydra's last stronghold on Earth. It wasn't just the visible cells. They eradicated Zola's deeply hidden artificial intelligence and hunted down the scattered remnants trying to resurrect Hydra's origins, Hive. Lion found them all and had the women in his team finish the job. When he turned on his super hearing now, he no longer heard true Hydra operatives loudly plotting. There were still criminals and imposters who used the Hydra name, but those were local police matters, not Lion's concern. For all intents and purposes, Hydra had been annihilated. Lion and Tony's revenge was complete. They'd broken the murderer's blade, severed their head, and buried their rage with Hydra's corpse. It drizzled in Los Angeles that day. Tony and Lion stood side by the graves of Howard and Maria, holding long black umbrellas. In sync, they placed white bouquets at the stones. After a long silence, they wiped the inscriptions and walked out of the cemetery together. Tony couldn't remember when he had last done this. Lion came every year. He understood Tony's feelings. Looking at Howard and Maria's graves always made Tony feel guilty and angry, unworthy to stand there. But today, he was calm. Lion knew why. Tony had grown up fast this year. From Tony's point of view, the last 7 months had been a lifetime. He had almost died in Afghanistan. He'd been betrayed by his uncle Obadiah after returning home. Then he'd taken on the 10 Rings alone in the Middle East. He'd accidentally saved another world that his brother nearly destroyed and had become in that world a kind of small Superman. He'd finally understood what his father truly felt for him. And now he'd wiped out the mastermind behind his parents' deaths. What he had seen and learned in these 6 months outweighed his previous 38 years. He had been forced to face himself, to decide what he wanted, and to find peace. If this were a movie, his character arc would be complete. The credits could roll. "I've decided to develop the Avengers," Tony said as they left the cemetery. "What about you? What's next?" "I already said," Lion replied, casual but steady. "Get stronger, keep getting stronger, and enjoy the process." He tilted his umbrella so the rain could splash his face. "I want to see the highest vistas, speak with what's above all things, chat with the first firmament. Eternity should call me friend, the Beyonder's brother." He kept walking. "That's my ultimate dream." Tony blinked, a little bewildered. "Who are you talking about?" A few days later, Lion packed his backpack to leave New York. He had arranged everything and was about to travel to Kamar Taj. For the Men in Black, the immediate work was mopping up Hydra's bases and returning the innocent children and experimental subjects taken from them. That would keep the team busy for a month or two. Shirley, now practically a daughter to Natasha's sisters, was in good hands. Natasha ran the networking company with meticulous care. Yelena's superhero company was booming. Ever since word got out that the Men in Black were affiliated with Superman, licensing and permissions flowed. The superhero company was approved worldwide, and its branches multiplied. Where once pirated Iron Man and Superman merchandise proliferated across borders, the market had calmed. Now the superhero company handled most of the merchandising. Rumor had it Yelena planned a movie called Superman vs. Iron Man to boost the IP, with Tony half the scriptwriter. In the movie's plot, Iron Man invents a form of kryptonite to beat Superman. At their final moment, a weakened Superman calls out his mother Maria's name, and Iron Man realizes Superman is human too. They reconcile and form the Avengers. When Lion saw the script, he nearly lost it and demanded a rewrite. Tony was the sort of man who loved a challenge. The stronger the enemy, the better he looked. Lion worried a little for him. The deadline the 10 Rings had set was approaching. By Lion's calculation, it should be tomorrow or the next day. Before he left, Lion flew back to Tony's seaside mansion in Los Angeles to check on him. When he entered Stark Manor, the scene from the front door to the living room was a horror show, masked corpses scattered across the floor. Tony sat in the middle of the bodies, calmly reading a beige letter. "Tony, what happened? Were you attacked again?" Lion demanded. He could tell from the blood and internal damage that these men had died from unarmed blows. Someone had literally crushed them from the inside out. The sight was gruesome. "These look like practice victims," Lion said. "Did you hire people to fight you before your duel, or did you decide to go back to bare knuckle?" "It's Iron Man." Tony rolled his eyes as he stood. "I'll beat Wenwu with my latest suit." He handed Lion the letter. Tony explained, "I was on a conference call when they broke in. They attacked, but then they just dropped this and left." Lion read the note. "Dear Mr. Tony Stark, today is the last day of our agreement. Your name has thundered in my ears lately. To take your head would be an honor. Out of respect for your contributions to the world, I will allow you to choose your burial place. At the Wu hour, I will arrive on time to send you on your way. Signed, Wenwu." Tony shrugged. At least he used polite language this time. He's not as condescending as before. Still bragging about taking my head, but it's progress. Lion crumpled the letter and tossed it away. "I thought his month would be 31 days, not 30, and that his count started the night he first attacked you," he muttered. The implication was that Wenwu's deadline might already be imminent. "Not that he's up to date on world affairs," Tony added. "He still doesn't realize the link between Superman and Iron Man." Many high-level officials in various countries had already guessed that Superman's true identity was Lion Stark. Without that, Tony wouldn't have become director of the new S.H.I.E.L.D. so smoothly. Once the world learned Lion's name, they felt reassured. Compared to a private Superman like Clark Kent, a Stark Superman was easier to accept. The Stark family was already a pillar of the status quo, unlikely to overturn the world order without warning. To them, it was just a more spectacular eagle over their heads. Wenwu was unlucky. He had once been invincible across Asia, but when he fell in love and went into seclusion in Kunlun village more than a decade ago, his networks crumbled. Only after his wife died did he attempt a return to power, and even then, it was hard to regain his old reach in a few years. That likely explained why he had little accurate intelligence about the Hydra incident. "Maybe he just doesn't fear Superman," Tony mused. Tony signaled, and the Mark IV armor flew out of the hangar and snapped onto his frame. "Let's meet him where you last tested your strength," Tony said. "It's away from the city and perfect for a fight." "By the way," Tony added, holding the destroyed letter up between two fingers, "Wu Shi-san K. That should mean noon, right?" Chapter 107, Tony's New Suit. On the familiar grassland, Leon and Tony stood side by side, hair whipping in the wind. The West Coast July weather was temperamental. Rolling dark clouds took turns on, casting everything in a cool light. The grass underfoot rippled like waves in the cold, desolate breeze. Leon stood silently for a moment, feeling the wind on his face. "It's only 11:40. We came early." "Punctuality's a good habit," Tony said, standing tall. "Arriving early gives you home field advantage. You don't want the 10 Rings showing up at your place and tearing it apart, do you?" "I don't live there anymore." Oh, fascinating. How about I clear out your room and get you a pet dog? If you do that, I'll shove your head up your ass. Disgusting. Can we change the subject? Leon tried to steer the conversation. All right, I just wanted to ask. He glanced up at the Mark IV hovering as a landmark. Where's your new armor? Tony, dressed in casual clothes, looked offended at the question. Didn't you say you'd be using your new suit to take down Wenwu today? A mysterious smile tugged at Tony's mouth. You'll see, I guarantee it'll leave you speechless. That mysterious? Good. I'm starting to look forward to it. Leon raised an eyebrow. I hope you keep your screaming to a minimum when you need help. Heh, Tony scoffed. Screaming for help? Not a chance. You're only going to see those kids walking around with underwear on their heads getting beaten senseless by me. Is that so? It's not the kids I'm worried about. It's their old leader. Leon's ears twitched. They're here. Where? Tony scanned the wide expanse of Stark's old park. The place had never been rebuilt after being abandoned, only sparse palms and open sightlines for kilometers, then cliffs and shallows beyond. There, Leon pointed to the horizon. Tony looked up. 7 or 8 black dots were approaching from the skyline. A faint rumble of engines grew louder. Holy moly. I thought they'd come sneaking up from under the cliffs like assassins in a movie. Helicopters? 3 minutes later, amid deafening noise, 8 helicopters cut through the damp air and touched down in front of them. Powerful downwash from the rotors whipped the grass into a frenzy. The air smelled of wet earth as the blades rustled. Helicopter doors opened in sequence. Dozens of masked men disembarked and formed ranks on the grass. The lead helicopter had a cinematic quality, the final boss before the main character. As the men assembled, the right cabin door of that chopper opened slowly. A polished combat boot appeared, followed by the sweep of a black traditional outfit cinched with a sash. The figure stepped out with deliberate poise. Tony's eyes narrowed. He bristled, inexplicably wounded by the air of superiority. He'd pictured this as a duel, a grand, arms-flung showdown where he'd stride in, dramatic and armed, and tear off the veil of this centuries-old organization with guns and cannons. Instead, the villainal leader had arrived in a helicopter, grandstanding as if no one else mattered. And here, he and his kid brother stood like a couple of airport greeters, waiting for the chopper's passenger to step out and flick cigarette ash at them. Tony took a few deep breaths. He'd never been looked down on like this before. He'd always been the one doing the looking down. I want to twist that guy's head off right now, Tony hissed to Leon. Press it into the helicopter prop and ask him whether he'll still fly next time. Then go ahead. Leon stepped back. The old man getting out of the chopper is Wenwu. Leon felt no particular emotion at Wenwu's contempt. The man had never intended to leave Los Angeles whole today. Tony's outrage, however, amused him. Tony had misread the tone of this whole thing. He'd been waiting for a formal duel, while Wenwu had always delivered death notices with a sneer. Tony had given the encounter more drama than it deserved. Tony Stark, the man said, interrupting Tony's glare. Hello, I am Wenwu. Wenwu looked every bit the traditional East Asian gentleman, slicked back hair, poised, the kind of quiet refinement that suggested a life of reading and restraint. Time had honed the depth in his eyes into something cold and unyielding. When he spoke, his voice carried a sharp brutality. You even brought your brother, he said. Shame, both of you will die here today. Tony stepped forward, glaring back. Oh, is that so? Why can't it be you and your men who die here? He tried to sound cutting, but his natural playboy bravado couldn't match the deadly edge in Wenwu's gaze. To Leon, Tony looked outmatched. I die here? Wenwu almost laughed. He walked between the lines of men, scanning the area. The graveyard you chose for yourself is picturesque, Mr. Stark. He turned back to Tony and raised a hand as if offering mercy. I give you a chance to make a move, Mr. Stark. No chance of survival. Mind you, if you intend to flee, do it now. Wenwu looked at Tony with disinterest. Centuries of conquest had made him convinced of his own invincibility. Tony opened his mouth, hunting for something memorable to say. The best he'd ever come up with in his life had been, I am Iron Man. He held his tongue for a few seconds, then jabbed a finger at Wenwu's chest. You'll regret this. Tony stepped back, hands level and trembling slightly. A whooshing sound fell from the sky. Dozens of heads turned as 6 or 7 metallic pieces spat flame and tore through the clouds, racing straight for Tony. "Is that a Mark 42? Leon breathed, stunned. It was the armor that could split into parts and fly to assemble itself around the wearer. Mechanical components, hands, arms, legs, rushed in on precise trajectories. Everyone present, except Leon, felt a jolt of shock at the sight. Chapter 108, Confrontation and Second Round. The moment Tony started attaching the suit, he actually shot upward, probably trying to do an aerial suit-up. Instead, the suit's own kinetic force catapulted him. The chest plate latched on first, and he was flung high. Arm and leg pieces smacked into him midair and sent his trajectory spinning. At last, the head and groin armor caught up, and when they snapped home with a final thunk, Tony swore loud enough that everyone flinched. A collective breath was drawn in the square. Even Wenwu, who had been as still as water since he arrived, flicked his eyelids open and showed a flash of surprise. Leon, watching, couldn't help muttering. If Tony hadn't been in excellent shape, that whole stunt might have ended in disaster. Leon glanced up through the altitude with supervision and realized the aerial fortress had parked itself above Los Angeles some time ago, ready to back Tony at a moment's notice. No doubt many men in black watched this decisive fight from there. Tony's chaotic suit-up had announced, as loudly to his enemies as to his own people, what a rebellious Mark could do. Fortunately, Tony engaged the suit's thrusters in time and steadied himself before he could become a spectacle on the pavement. He flew back and landed in front of Wenwu, trying to look casual. "I'm fine. Just a little glitch. Now we can begin." Wenwu shook his head. "I'll let you make the first move. After 10 moves, you'll die." He already judged Tony not to be a match. After the circus-like performance he'd just witnessed, Wenwu felt even less worried. The 10 rings on his wrists flared with a cold blue light as he tightened his hands, the energy washing over him. 10 moves? You must be joking. I need only 1. Tony had heard from Leon that Wenwu's 10 rings could even open dimensions. He didn't underestimate him. But he couldn't afford to lose momentum. He struck immediately, firing a crimson beam from his chest that split toward Wenwu like a lightsaber. The weapon's cutting power, seen in other clashes, was brutal enough to annihilate suits. Wenwu's face, usually unreadable, drained of color. He threw his arms up to block, but he was a hair too slow. The beam struck the 10 rings. They held, but the edge grazed his cheek. Wenwu crossed his arms, thrust forward, and the recoil scattered the beam. He wiped the blood from his face with his thumb, eyes narrowing. 9 moves left. He braced, right leg cocked, hands ready. Tony seized the moment to taunt. "That laser only works once for now, so relax." Tonally smug, he launched into a flurry. Palm repulsors, chest unibeam, micro-missiles. Every offensive system the Mark had. It was less an attack than a weapons test. The strikes didn't wound Wenwu. At most, the unibeam shoved him back a few centimeters. The insult stung. Wenwu's gaze sharpened to an eagle's. A cold, knife-edge aura coiled around him. Tony had provoked him, but Tony had also reclaimed the initiative. 10 moves, huh? Harder than it looks. Tony floated with arms folded, ready to gloat, when Wenwu exploded into motion. He launched over 10 meters in a single bound. The 10 rings erupted in blue light as he punched straight into the Mark's chest. Tony folded like a bent shrimp, slammed into the earth, and kicked up a storm of dust. Wenwu didn't let up. He vaulted after him, hands clasped high, and came down like a collapsing mountain. The impact shook the ground and would have crippled the old Tony. But the Mark answered. A brilliant flash burst from the ruin, and a red repulsor beam hurled Wenwu backward. The battered Mark V staggered free, its chest armor torn to shreds, the palm repulsor charging at Wenwu's face. Wenwu reacted in an instant. The 5 rings on his left hand glowed white-hot. He grabbed the repulsor, yanked with inhuman strength, and ripped the entire arm off the suit. He repeated the motion with his right hand and tore off the other arm. The 2 of them toppled, then crashed into the ground again. Wenwu flipped to his feet, shoved his hands into the Mark's seams, and unleashed the 10 rings. The armor came apart under his grip like a child disassembling Lego. Panels flew, components scattered, and blue and white arcs of electricity spat from exposed wiring. With Tony stripped of mechanical protection, Wenwu hauled him up by the collar. "To make it this far, I'll give you credit. Your little invention isn't bad. Wenwu said, eyes dark. I should kill you here, but I'll offer a choice instead. Give me the technology for this mark, and I'll let you and your brother go. Dust smeared Tony's face, but he grinned through it. Nice offer. You're a bit early with the surrender. He dropped his voice low. Round 2 starts now. For the first time, he used pure strength. Tony grabbed both of Wenwu's wrists and pulled hard. Wenwu's eyes went wide. Tony's lean hands had real power. They actually pried Wenwu's wrists apart. Wenwu staggered, shocked. What? He slammed the 10 rings output higher, pouring raw energy into the strike. The blast snapped Tony away like a rubber ball. The 10 rings detached from his wrists and connected in midair, forming ribbon-like energy whips. He was using them as weapons now. This was his deadliest tactic. On the other side, Tony was already back up, unharmed. He wiped dust from his face, ripped off his ruined shirt with casual force, and took an arc reactor from his pocket. He pressed it to his chest. In an instant, black filamentous tendrils erupted from the reactor and from his suit housing, crawling over him. They knit and fused into armor, sleek, black, alive. I am Iron Man, Tony said. Black, filamentous strands surged out from the gaps between Tony's bones and muscles, flicking from his fingertips along his arms, up his spine. They flowed smoothly over him like liquid and spread until his whole body was covered. The arc reactor in his chest flared to life at the same moment, the current connecting into a terminal. The filaments hardened instantly, solidifying into armor that gleamed like a mirror. It was jet black, and though it was made of filamentous material, it carried a metallic sheen. The helmet's eyes brightened, and new energy cannons formed in his hands. What the hell? Not just the 10 Rings members. Leon was stunned too. Biological armor like this? The E-mold was still back in the Resident Evil world. What were these black filaments? He flipped on his X-ray vision and scanned Tony. Under the streamlined plating, countless filaments linked the armor to Tony's body. They ran into the subcutaneous tissue, threaded through gaps between cells, and reached into the bones themselves. In the bone cavities, Leon could see incredibly precise metal circuitry. He could tell the circuits contained trace amounts of vibranium, the tiny amount serving as a crucial medium. Billions of filaments wound around those circuits, densely connected all the way to the arc reactor in Tony's chest. There, the reactor converted its cold nuclear energy into bioelectricity, continuously powering the endless filaments. Leon understood. Tony had implanted a kind of fungus and core armor components into the spaces in his bones. The fungus control and bloodline parasite manipulation abilities granted by the SS3 type enhanced serum, now powered by the arc reactor, were perfectly integrated with the fungus into a stable, enhanced structure. So this was the new armor Tony had secretly been tinkering with in the Resident Evil world. He hadn't been exaggerating. This armor exceeded Leon's expectations and left him genuinely shocked. Mark 6, that's the name of this armor. Today's its first outing. Tony's feet spewed propulsion flames and he shot into the air. The suit moved as if it were part of him. Flight felt effortless, like a fish in water. Don't worry, Tony called out, grinning at Leon. These mycelia aren't E-mold. They're a new strain I cultured while I was there, modeled on mold. They aren't contagious, and they don't have any of those messy enhancement or mutation properties. I call them fungus gods. They reproduce super fast, and they amplify all my abilities. As he talked, the cannon on his left hand vanished into flame, while his right hand reformed into a serrated mycelial greatsword. Halftime's over. Time for round 2. He dove, flames and blade converging toward Wenwu. The 10 Rings leader was already on high alert. The armor alone radiated an oppressive, mountain-like pressure. When they clashed, Wenwu felt it was more than intimidation. This armor translated into real combat power. The mycelial greatsword met the 10 Rings with a shower of sparks and flame. The two split after the impact and came together again. Tony's hands reshaped constantly, cluster cannons, whips, giant blades. A flaming whip coiled around Wenwu. Tony called it abusive bondage play. A 2-meter blade cleaved downward in a devastating slash, nicknamed the awesome fungus god Fireblade. He lashed and bound while cannon fire and scorching heat rained down. For a time, Wenwu struggled, 10 Rings twirling in a defensive dance. Many of the 10 Rings members watched in stunned silence. None of them had seen anyone hold their leader off like this before. Leon stood among them, arms folded, appreciating the display. The armor could withstand extreme heat, morph at will, and had a clear amplifying effect. With it on, Tony's power had visibly increased by 30 to 50%, a significant boost given a base strength exceeding 100 tons. Even so, Leon didn't think Tony could finish Wenwu. The Ten Rings' defense was formidable. Tony hadn't broken it yet. With both fighters' stamina, this could drag on for days. Something had to change. After a few more exchanges, Tony proved he agreed. He spat propulsion flames and pulled back, landing on the grass dozens of meters away with his hands clasped in front of him. "Careful, grumpy old man. I'm getting serious now," he teased, giving Wenwu a nickname as usual. The filaments in his hands flowed together into a single, massive, elongated cannon. It was larger than Tony himself, maw-like and blood-red. From a distance, Leon recognized the design, a current cannon developed by Umbrella Corporation. Not a projectile weapon, but one that fired a massive impact current. "Picked up a bit of inspiration from another world," Tony said. "You'll like this." He began to charge. Arcs of lightning danced along the muzzle of the cannon formed by his clasped hands. Blades of grass and loose debris spun in the electromagnetic field around him. The glow at the muzzle intensified. The debris whirled faster and faster. 2 seconds later, the charge peaked. A silver-blue spear of current, a full meter thick, condensed like lightning and launched. Wherever it cut, turf heaved and dirt tore. The spear tore through obstacles and streaked toward Wenwu. Wenwu didn't interrupt him. He waited until the current spear was unleashed, then narrowed his eyes. With a series of practiced motions, he made the 10 rings rotate and overlap, drawing a strange, amplifying energy. The energy defense condensed and met the current spear head-on. At the collision, the air seemed to shiver. An invisible shockwave radiated outward, throwing turf and clods of earth into the air. Grass and sand scattered like rain. The current cannon's signature was penetration, but Wenwu stopped it. He was thrown backward by the force, flipped, and landed with only his hair slightly mussed. "I want the tech for this armor of yours," Wenwu said, regard in his voice. Chapter 110, a terrifying product from the world of Resident Evil. Wenwu looked completely relaxed. Tony did not. His slightly smug expression hardened. He'd thought he'd gained the upper hand, but only because in close quarters the Ten Rings leader hadn't been able to show his full strength. By opening up distance, Tony had actually made a mistake. Suddenly, he remembered Leon's assessment of Wenwu. Objective. Accurate. If it had been Tony a month ago, when he first received the death notice, he probably wouldn't have stood a chance, even with 100 allies. Things were getting tricky, but Tony couldn't lose face. "Still asking strangers for candy, old sourpuss?" he shot back. "Fine, beat me, the candy's yours." Wenwu sneered. The 10 rings flowed in his hands like living things. His application of force shifted between rigid and supple, like the autumn wind scouring fallen leaves, like a stream threading a mountain gorge. The rings' energies began to converge and stack. Then he threw a punch. The rings locked together and detonated in a flash of deep blue energy that ripped toward Tony. Tony fired his thrusters to dodge, but the rings kept chasing. He had to condense a fungus shield with both hands to block. The moment it met the 10 rings, the shield shattered. The black fungus died under the terrifying energy and scattered into the air. Tony was blasted to the ground. When he staggered to his feet, a massive chunk of armor was missing from his chest. Fortunately, with ample energy, the mycelium in his suit rapidly split and repaired the gap in seconds. That black fungus came from the Resident Evil world. Why it behaved so outrageously, Tony still remembered. In that other world, when he'd fought alongside the new human army against the zombie horde, those super zombies would sometimes, after entering a third stage, swell from human size to the size of a small mountain without warning, as if mass and energy were freely converted. Tony suspected it was a unique biohazard mechanism that turned energy into mass. He'd incorporated that into a new strain of fungus and built it into his armor. As long as he had enough energy, the armor could reproduce, practically indestructible. "That punch hurt," Tony admitted, rubbing his neck. Giant blades and swords were formed in his hands. Wenwu favored long-range attacks. Tony had to close the distance. Even if it became a war of attrition, Tony had faith. After feeding reactor output into his fungus god armor, it returned energy to him, restoring his stamina. He felt he could fight like this all day. "Come on!" Tony shouted, thrusters kicking him low across the grass, blades ready. But Wenwu didn't engage. He tapped the ground and retreated with impossible grace, drifting like willow catkins on the breeze. Leon watched Wenwu glide and felt like he was watching a martial arts movie from a past life. With that floating footwork, how could Tony catch him? The pair chased each other back and forth, but the distance never closed. Tony couldn't land a blow, while Wenwu could repeatedly strike him with the 10 rings. Tony's superb regeneration, body and armor, made him like a cockroach, pummeled again and again, but still fighting. 10 minutes passed. Neither could touch the other with decisive effect. Frustration built. Tony abandoned close combat, his hands reconfigured into crimson laser cannons. He looked like a crimson-clad Jedi. Wenwu halted and assumed a Tai Chi-like stance, channeling the 10 rings' energy. The rings easily dispersed the lasers. With momentum undiminished, they stacked and slammed into Tony's chest. The fungus god armor tore apart again. This time, the reactor itself was smashed to scrap. Tony yanked a fresh arc reactor from a pocket, slapped it onto his chest, and the fungus god armor rebuilt. Again and again. Wenwu ground his teeth and retracted the 10 rings to recharge. He attacked in a barrage, each impact shattering Tony's armor. Each time Tony patched it, the rings smashed it again. One man flew overhead while the other chased on the ground. The roles reversed constantly. "This is a true deadlock," Leon muttered. If Tony fighting skills were a bit sharper, he might crack it. The fight spilled beyond the grassy knoll. Wenwu took a few blasts. Tony was blasted off a cliff by the 10 rings. Leon wanted to follow, but Wenwu didn't look back. He barked an order and leapt off the cliff. "Capture Tony Stark's brother. See if he'd trade his armor for his sibling." Leon turned. Dozens of 10 Rings members, some in training clothes, some in ninja outfits, had surrounded him, weapons drawn, eyes hard. "We can talk this out," Leon said, hands up. They pulled guns and drew swords. "Fine, different approach." Leon's eyes flashed red a moment later, and he launched toward the cliff amid cries of alarm. But before he could get near, he heard dull thuds. Thump, 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 like a giant hammer battering at rock. He could even hear Wenwu cursing something under his breath. What was happening below the cliff? Leon hovered at the cliff edge and looked down. Holy shit, there was no sign of Tony in human form. Where Tony had been, a swath of beach at the cliff's base was completely overrun by dark mycelium. Clumps of fungus spread across the shoreline and up the cliff face, blackening everything. Bushes were mummified into dead branches. Fish trapped in the webby growth went from alive to dry bones in seconds. In the center of the black, a towering humanoid fungal form rose over 10 meters tall. Tony's chest and cheeks were visible at its torso, but his limbs and head were submerged in the massive fungal husk, connected by thickening mycelial tendrils. When he moved his hand, the giant fungal body moved. The fungal colossus had no feet and couldn't walk. It was a piloted shell. Tony turned into a tyrant? Leon blurted. Then he saw the signs. Tony's consciousness was clear, his flesh uncorroded. This whole thing was under his control. He's using the fungus to reproduce en masse, draining nutrients from the coastline to expand the body and amplify his force, Leon said aloud. So it isn't a tyrant, it's a fungal version of a Gundam? The thought hit him. Tony essentially piloting a giant biological suit. Tony, inside the fungal behemoth, casually slapped Wenwu with one massive hand. The 10 Rings' defense shattered like tissue. He scooped Wenwu up by an ankle and flung him around the sand like a lump of dough. Strength had been amplified 5 to 10 times, Leon estimated. The giant fungal armor had the force of roughly 1,000 tons. Odd, but impressive, Leon admitted. Within minutes, Wenwu, locked in those fungal grips, was drained dry, reduced to a desiccated mummy. Tony exhaled, looking relieved. Then he looked up and saw Leon hovering overhead. His exhaustion evaporated. "Leon," he called, lifting his chin and spreading his hands. "Not bad, huh? My fungus god armor solved a 10 Rings leader with one slap." Leon touched down. "It looks effective." "And what now? You can't leave this fungus here." "I can control its growth," Tony said. He pulled mycelial mass off his left hand, and it receded like tidewater. He rotated his arc reactor. "Reverse the energy flow, and the fungus will lose vitality quickly." The arc reactor glowed as it began converting the mycelium's bioelectricity back into electrical energy through Tony's body. Leon watched the tips of the mycelium on the sea surface turn gray-white. But he frowned. If all the bioenergy from that huge stretch of coast were suddenly dumped back into Tony, it could overload him. Tony, if you convert all that energy back into yourself. Ah! He didn't finish. Tony screamed. Veins on his chest bulged and burst, his heart swollen as if about to rupture. The reverse energy surged beyond his body's tolerance. Damn it! Leon grabbed Tony, yanked the arc reactor out, and crushed it with his bare hands. I knew you weren't reliable. He grumbled as his eyes flared and heat rays incinerated the mycelium clinging to the cliff and shore in a few breaths. The lush coastline went from green to a scorched, lava-like crust. Seawater washed over it and left only dark, blackened rock. Tony panted and gave a rueful smile. I thought it would be perfectly controllable. Small miscalculation. I'll need to reroute the energy return. Crimson spots glowed on his body as super regeneration kicked in. Next time, don't use the Gundam form unless you have to. Leon set Tony down on solid ground, and they walked toward where the 10 rings had fallen. Chapter 10 Rings. Wenwu's body had been drained by the fungus and then turned to ash by the heat ray. Only the 10 rings lay quietly on the scorched rock. Even though the surrounding land had been ravaged, the rings themselves looked unblemished. Their divine radiance, however, had been reined in. They appeared as ordinary metal bands. Leon crouched and picked them up, wiping away the soot. Tony leaned over. Why aren't they glowing anymore? Is there a hidden switch? Tony grinned. Or are they touch-controlled, voice-controlled? Voice-controlled? You think the 10 rings are home appliances? Leon laughed. They're controlled by thought, kind of like your fungus. Watch. Leon's gaze narrowed. He reached out with his mind, and the plain iron bands burst into light. Not the yellow flames Wenwu had shown, but a white-gold glow, 10 diluted suns spinning around him. What do you feel? Tony asked, eyes alight. There's a huge energy flowing in them. Huh, that energy's starting to strengthen me. Leon spread his hands and his body floated up as the rings formed a halo, rising and falling with him. After a few seconds, he dropped back down, not very impressed. The boost isn't huge, only about a 1% increase. 1%? Tony's eyes widened. 1% is 20,000 tons or 40,000 tons. These rings can add that much? My single-arm output went up by about 20,000 tons. That's not necessarily the limit. I just don't have great compatibility with them. Leon slid the 10 rings onto his wrist. Wenwu's compatibility must have been really low if his strength was only a few dozen tons. It's not the same thing. My physiology is able to take more of the ring's energy. Leon rotated the rings in his hand. The 10 rings could boost Wenwu's body by hundreds of times. Maybe he was actually better suited to them than I am. They also grant long life, maybe even permanence, Tony said, incredulous. Permanent life? Tony snorted. You're joking. No, it's true. Wenwu lived 1,000 years, Leon said, but I don't feel any change in my lifespan either. Maybe because you're still young, Tony muttered. Leon shook his head. The most dangerous thing about these weapons, though, is their own power. He swung his arm toward the sea. 5 rings snapped into a line and shot out like javelins. The surface of the ocean split before them. Waves heaved 10 meters high, and the nearshore seabed was exposed. Leon hadn't thrown with physical force. He was directing the rings themselves. With a flick of his wrist, the 5 returned to his forearm and the divided water closed, tens of thousands of droplets shattering and raining onto the beach. Tony's mind raced. I've got an idea. You want to put the 10 rings on your armor? Leon followed the thought. The rings might fit Tony's fungus god armor perfectly. The suit was biological, symbiotic in a way that reminded Leon of the comic symbiote armors. Its raw combat power might be a little behind some mythic armors, but its potential wasn't far off. If the 10 rings could be integrated, Tony's armor might reach celestial tier performance. It's not impossible. These are your spoils of war. Try them. Leon sent the rings across to Tony. Technically, Wenwu's attack had been resolved by Tony's effort more than Leon's. Leon had mostly observed and handled a few nuisances, so it wasn't wrong to call the rings Tony's prize. Tony took them carefully and slipped them onto his arms. Let's see how compatible I am. I'll be 100% match. He clenched his fists, excited. Leon, I'm going to be Superman too. Ha ha! Tony tried to mentally command them, to channel power into the rings with the ferocity he always used. Nothing. He strained, screamed, flexed his back muscles until veins stood out, but the bands didn't respond. He half-squatted and roared at the ocean, shirtless, resembling a fanboy doing a Super Saiyan impression, his voice getting shriller and shriller. The rings remained inert. Shit! Tony panted, red-faced, embarrassed, and out of breath. Do I have no compatibility? Try a different approach, Leon suggested. Like what? Tony was blank for a moment. He tried on absurdity to break the tension. Maybe different people use the 10 rings differently. Try shouting magical girl transformation while communicating with them. Tony's face dropped. Are you serious? Forget it. You use them. 20,000 tons is nothing to sneeze at. I don't need them. You keep them and research them. Research, right? Back to the fortress. I'll try high-frequency currents. Tony declared, furious with himself. I don't believe I can't use these. If I can't, I'll melt them down. He tapped an arc reactor into his chest, armored up in the fungus god armor, and flew off toward the fortress. Leon laughed after him. Don't forget, maybe they require a particular state of mind to resonate. Try calm, not shouting. You shut up, Tony called back as he flew, then vanished into the clouds. As it turned out, Leon had been right. After several days of experiments, Tony discovered that the 10 rings required a stable emotional state on first resonance, something like absolute calm and selflessness, a stillness like water. Once someone was able to reach that initial resonance, control became simple. Thought alone sufficed. Tony grumbled about it for days. It was just a weapon. How could it care about psychology? But he eventually learned to work with them. While Leon and Tony dealt with the rings, on the other side of the planet, Director Fury, under supervision, was not idle. He couldn't access the internet or contact the outside world from his detention, but Fury still had channels of intelligence. Finding Superman's true identity was his priority. An unknown being of that much power was a threat. A week went by with no useful leads. Instead, the Security Council had commissioned a background check on Tony Stark, someone Fury had once recommended for promotion, and they had sent Fury a copy. Fury leafed through it with casual interest. Woohoo! He once had 7 cover girls stay overnight at the same time. Our new director is really charming, isn't he? Fury muttered, flipping pages without much care. Chapter 112. Welcome to Kamartaj. Fury already knew most of Tony's history, and there was nothing in it that alarmed him. Since returning from Afghanistan, Tony had even changed many of his worst habits. He seemed to have developed the mindset to shoulder S.H.I.E.L.D.'s responsibilities. The only real worry was that the man might try to date every female agent at the Bureau. According to the background check, the worst thing Tony had ever actively done was throw several weeks of non-stop parties, a detail the Security Council had dismissed as frivolous. In Fury's view, that was hardly a problem. He flipped through the file to pass the time in his confinement. Look at this. He once spent $1 million to persuade his brother's first girlfriend to leave. Our Iron Man is still an old-fashioned parent, he muttered, then continued skimming. And later, are these all things he's done for his brother, Lion? If Lion wanted to start a company, he provided inventions and funding. If Lion's grades were only average, he secretly donated to top universities. If Lion wanted to fly into space, he personally built a spacecraft. I wish I had a brother that rich. Fury shook his head as he read. Then, for no obvious reason, he sat up. Spacecraft. His finger paused on a line. Late 2007, Lyon Stark boarded a spacecraft and ascended into space. He flipped forward, heart quickening. The file contained no record of the spacecraft's return. The Security Council would never have missed that, so if there was no entry, the implication was clear. The craft that left half a year ago had not come back to Earth. Coulson, we all saw Lyon Stark about a month ago, didn't we? Fury called upstairs. The rhythmic thumping on the floor stopped. Coulson answered, That's right, Director. The day Tony Stark announced himself as Iron Man, we all saw his brother Lion. You even got thrown out of the villa by him. That was memorable. Fury tapped Lion's photo with his index finger and let out a slow breath. Now I know why the Security Council made me read this file. So you are Superman, Lyon Stark. That's surprisingly comforting. Fury's voice grew steadier as the pieces fell together. The spacecraft was still floating in space, but Lion had already returned to Earth. His reappearance half a year later coincided with the emergence of Superman. Tony had publicly acknowledged an acquaintance with this Superman at the hearing. Put all the clues together, and the improbable began to look inevitable. Fury paced the room. Iron Man, Men in Black, Superman, the three new forces that popped up out of nowhere are actually one and the same. Could Hydra's exposure have been their doing too? Coulson asked. Why would they do this? Maybe it has something to do with Howard Stark. Fury sank back into his chair and stared at Lion's photo. At least Superman's identity is known. He might be somewhat trustworthy. Maybe I can bring both Stark brothers into the Avengers. Motherfucker. Tony Stark already renamed S.H.I.E.L.D. the Avengers. Fury slammed his hand on his knee at the memory and scowled. He had always dreamed of the Avengers, and now Tony had co-opted the name. The anger subsided into a darker worry. The Stark brothers now controlled the most powerful force and the most important authority on Earth. They could no longer be easily constrained. And Tony had been placed in that position, in part, by Fury himself. Maybe when my confinement is over, it's time for me to go to S.W. Ord and have a long talk with Monica Rambeau, he muttered. The day after Tony defeated Wenwu, Tony threw himself into studying the Ten Rings, renovating the villa, and organizing the Avengers. Leon, meanwhile, had packed his bags and boarded a plane for Nepal. His destination was Kamartaj. Lion suspected that the moment he decided to visit, the Ancient One, who possessed the Time Stone, already knew. To show respect, he deliberately avoided the Sanctum on Bleecker Street and took the long route. He flew to Kathmandu, intending to find Kamartaj on foot, measuring the city with his own steps. He would turn the search into a tour, visit Pashupatinath Temple and the Buddhanath Stupa. Jarvis had even helped him put together a 3-day, 3-night travel guide. But as soon as Lion stepped out of the airport, a man in a hooded robe was waiting for him. One hand was raised in a respectful half-bow. Esteemed Mr. Superman, the Sorcerer Supreme sends her greetings. Please follow me. I have already arranged transportation to Kamartaj. Oh, good. Lion felt unprepared but followed the man into a waiting car. I am Carl Mordo, Mr. Superman, the man said as he drove. Call me Mordo. You just arrived, so rest for a bit. We'll be there soon. Thank you for your trouble, Lion replied. He watched the streets slide by, from suburbs to bustling city, and then into an older temple district. His 3-day travel plan dissolved in 10 minutes. Kamartaj, which he had expected to search for, had come to the airport to greet him. It felt almost ceremonial. Mordo parked on a narrow street, leapt out to open the door, took Lion's luggage, and led the way. The sanctum is difficult for cars to reach. We'll have to walk a short way. Please excuse the inconvenience, he said apologetically. Lion nodded, amused. If they could come to the airport to greet him, why not simply open a portal and appear at the sanctum? Why all the driving and walking? He shrugged off the thought. Events had already diverged from his expectations. Mordo pushed open a weathered wooden door and ushered Lion into the inner hall of Kamartaj. The hall, at once elegant and austere, left Lion astonished. 2 female sorcerers stepped forward to help him remove his backpack and coat. 2 male sorcerers arranged cushions and patted away imaginary dust, indicating a seat of honor. Lion sat cross-legged, awkward and a little overwhelmed, while the 4 retreated to a respectful distance. Please have some tea, a gentle voice said nearby. Thank you. Lion smiled and raised the cup, about to compliment it, when his eyes widened. Ancient One? Kneeling beside him and offering the tea was the Sorcerer Supreme, Gu Yi, the Ancient One. Dressed in a brown-yellow robe, she looked every inch a master, still-eyed like calm water, a faint smile touching her lips. It is I. Welcome to Kamartaj, Mr. Lion, she said. Chapter 113, Multiverse. You know me? Of course you should know me. Mr. Lion looked at the bald man opposite him. The assessment was instant, a hairstyle for someone who meant business. What I mean is, you don't strike me as a hospitable sort, yet today you picked me up and served me tea. I'm genuinely honored. You aren't here to ask a favor, are you? Mr. Lion thought of a certain world consciousness that had wagged its tail and tried to ingratiate itself with him. He sipped the tea. Is this honey? It's good. The Ancient One flicked her fingers. The teacup in Mr. Lion's hand refilled on its own. If you like it, drink. There's plenty. You don't need to be guarded. I ask for nothing. This is how Camartage treats guests, welcome and courtesy. I'd do the same if Strange were here. Mr. Lion raised an eyebrow. Really? If an atheist like him showed up, you'd still give him a warning first, wouldn't you? The Ancient One smiled. Even then, I'd still offer him tea before the warning. What about me? I expected you sooner, Mr. Lion, she said, smiling. Maybe after your 18th birthday, or after you came back from space. I've been waiting for you for a long time, he said. Sounds like I've missed many appointments. Mr. Lion grinned. But I don't recall us ever meeting or having an arrangement. We haven't met, the Ancient One admitted, but you must know the phrase spiritual acquaintanceship over a long time. If you choose to call it that, yes. The honor is mine, sorcerer. I came to learn magic, Mr. Lion said plainly. All books in Camartage are open to you, the Ancient One replied. Thank you, or would you prefer I do something in return? Getting things for free feels awkward. Her smile warmed. I only have one question. Ask. How much do you know about the crisis our world will face, Mr. Lion? Dormammu, the Infinity Stones, Thanos. You know a lot. Anything else? And the multiverse crisis. That's what I wanted to speak about. I'm afraid the crisis is very near. The Ancient One's tone was steady. Mr. Lion's relaxed posture tensed. How so? Starting a few years ago, Wenwu's 10 rings began emitting a strange signal beyond our universe. Do you know what that is? The 10 rings transmitting a signal? That shouldn't happen for more than 10 years. Mr. Lion frowned. In the stories he'd seen, it was only after Shang-Chi mastered the 10 rings that they began transmitting to the multiverse. If they'd started already here, something didn't align. Why the time discrepancy? What information are they sending? You've used the 10 rings, the Ancient One prompted gently. What do they give a person? Power, energy, lifespan. Mr. Lion caught the thread. Lifespan is time, multiverse. Could the 10 rings be a device tied to Kang, the One Who Remains, the architect of the Time Variance Authority, or a weapon of one of his variants? She asked. Mr. Lion's face cleared. So the 10 rings might be transmitting our universe's coordinates to a Kang variant. Before he'd transmigrated, the MCU timeline he knew had only reached the second Captain Marvel film. He wasn't up to date on the full multiversal future and had been piecing things together from clues. The Ancient One nodded. The multiverse crisis is already underway. It won't be long before it reaches us. So our world isn't the primary universe, and the prime timeline is already more than 10 years ahead? Mr. Lion pressed. That depends on how you define primary, the Ancient One said softly. Isn't the main movie universe numbered 199999? Mr. Lion asked, speaking as if it were a simple fact. In his previous life, the movie universe had that designation. The Ancient One shook her head and stood, moving to the center of the inner hall. She extended a hand and drew from the air a writhing map built of raw cosmic energy. Her palm pulsed. Dozens of black spheres appeared in the three-dimensional diagram, each sphere a universe, clustered into groups that orbited one another. There is more than one multiverse within the omniverse. We are one of them, she said. Our multiverse's overall number is 1T9999. Within it, each parallel universe has its own designation. The main universe you mentioned is actually 1T9999A. In that multiverse, it corresponds to what many call the 616 universe. We here are another branch, 19999S. Mr. Lion was startled. Isn't 616 the comics' primary universe? The comics? The Ancient One paused, puzzled. What comics? I mean, shouldn't there be only one 616? He said. Not at all, she replied. Think of the multiverse as a complex of apartment buildings. Each building will have its own room numbered 616. You were right about one thing. 616 acts like a benchmark. It's the model home in a complex. Other universes shift around that model. From the Omniverse's viewpoint, the movie Multiverse is a pocket labeled 199999, but within it, the primary branch, 199999A, functions as a 616-like standard. And among the many buildings in the Omniverse, she added, the most important ones now are our building and another. The residents in the other building are far stronger than we are. Mr. Lion put the pieces together. The contradiction he'd noticed, movies calling themselves 616 while comics used 199999, fell into place. The difference came from perspective. 199999 is the movie Multiverse's overall identifier, while 616 is the benchmark branch inside a given multiverse. So our benchmark universe has already started a multiversal war? He asked. That's right, and the 10 rings will be one of the fuses that brings that war to our doorstep. I'll go have Tony try to block the 10 rings signal, Mr. Lion said, urgency rising. It's useless. The information was sent out years ago. The enemy may already be en route. You're remarkably calm, he said. Panic flared in him at the thought of a multiversal war. Cosmic-level threats require cosmic-level defenses, and he was far from that. You must have some way to deal with this, right? The Ancient One looked at him without anxiety. Her smile was steady and deep, like a spring pond with no ripple of worry. You came to learn magic. Would you like to begin now? For reasons he couldn't name, she had shifted the conversation to magic. Chapter 114, The Matter of Becoming a Teacher in a Day Without Having a Teacher. Mr. Lion stood up, curious. How do I experience it? Like this. The Ancient One suddenly thrust out a palm aimed straight at Mr. Lion's chest. He dodged instinctively. Her palm missed, and she followed with another strike. He dodged again and again. The Ancient One withdrew her hand with an exasperated sigh. Don't move. With your speed and reflexes, I won't be able to hit you until dusk. Sorry, I moved on instinct. Are you going to use astral projection on me? Come on! I'm ready! Mr. Lion puffed out his chest. He had long wanted to feel real magic. The Ancient One struck again. This time her palm connected squarely with his chest. A strange sensation surged through him. It felt as if some restraint around his spirit was beginning to loosen. A few seconds later, he blinked and looked at the Ancient One. Hasn't it started yet? It's already over. Your body is very strong, and something peculiar protects your consciousness, so your soul is unusually stable. It will take more effort, she explained. Mr. Lion froze at her words. Peculiar ability? Did she mean his world-traveling ability, his gene self-locking, or some resident authority? He didn't press the point. The Ancient One had already begun to gather energy, palms pressed together. Mordo, who had been standing to the side, watched in astonishment, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. This was the first time he'd seen someone who could blunt the Sorcerer Supreme's spell. The Ancient One's palms brimmed with the energies of the multiverse. A few seconds later, she struck again, more seriously. This time, Mr. Lion's soul was forced out, almost. Only his upper half left his body. A translucent upper torso streamed out while his lower body remained rooted. I can see the back of my own head. Is this astral projection? Ancient One, I want to learn this. Mr. Lion's disembodied upper body waved its arms, then realized something was wrong. Wait, where are my feet? Why are my feet still there? He tried to float, but his lower half held him back, tethering his astral form so he could only wiggle in place. Why do I feel like an earthbound spirit? His expression was bewildered. He could even command limited movement in the lower body. The Ancient One gave a helpless laugh. Let's stop here for now. You can try by yourself later when you've learned astral projection properly. For his soul to fully leave his body would require a stronger spell. The Ancient One had long extended her life by drawing on the dark dimension. Given her current condition, using too much intensity would risk exposing those dark energies. She didn't mind tapping them, but she couldn't afford to let the other sorcerers think she had embraced darkness. Kamartaj's morale would suffer, especially after Caecilius's betrayal. She dispelled the spell, and Mr. Lion's soul slipped back into his body. Even half a taste of it was incredible, Mr. Lion said, looking at his hands. Ancient One, when do we start the lessons? After Mordo finds you a room and shows you around. The Ancient One smiled. She was pleased to teach him. She had seen a kind of hope in him. Mordo stepped forward, clearing his throat. Mr. Lion, please follow me. Once he began learning spells, Mr. Wrath Lion would officially be part of the sorcerers. A grand sorcerer like Mordo already regarded him as one of their own. Thank you, Mordo. Mr. Lion nodded and followed him out of the inner hall. They toured the training grounds, clusters of ancient buildings and the library, then at last the living quarters. This will be your room. The restroom is over there, and you can meditate beside it. Also, This is the Wi-Fi password. Mordo handed him a slip of paper, bowed slightly, and left. I won't disturb you further. When you're ready, find the Sorcerer Supreme in the inner hall. She will teach you the practice of magic. Alone in the room, Mr. Lion looked at the slip. Shambhala, just like the movie. Has this password never changed? A voice in his head recited the transliteration. Shambhala, the pure land of Buddhism, which made sense for a secretive, esoteric place like Kamartaj. He tidied up quickly, took photos to send to Sherry and Tony, and went back to the Ancient One. They sat facing each other. The teaching began simply. Before you learn magic, you must first understand it and clarify why you want to learn. This is crucial for us sorcerers, she continued. You can travel between worlds, and in time you may encounter even greater powers. But for Kamartaj, magic is essentially borrowing power from other dimensions at a cost. The simplest way to judge a sorcerer is to see how much power they can extract for the smallest cost. Mr. Lion couldn't help but grin. Someone like you, who borrows without giving back, must be the most powerful sorcerer, right? The Ancient One paused and smiled. You know me well, but not quite. The most powerful sorcerer doesn't merely borrow, he devours the source, turning it into his own power. Who, Ancient One? You can't let the other sorcerers hear that. They'll go mad. Mr. Lion twirled his teacup. So that's why you stress clarifying purpose before learning magic. Only unwavering devout conviction can keep a sorcerer from being corrupted by power. Sometimes devotion and madness are only a hair's breadth apart. Mr. Lion, I see a firm desire in you to grow stronger. That is your purpose for learning magic. Hold on to it. Never be complacent. Always strive for greater strength. Perhaps one day you'll reach the realm of Agamotto. Mr. Lion was surprised. You think highly of me? Of course. Your talent is no less than Strange's. You have infinite potential. The Ancient One drew a portal in the air with her finger and produced several thick tomes. Your physical strength makes you a magnet for the attention of dimensional entities. That is your greatest asset as a magic user. The powers from other realms will be eager to lend you strength. Although Kamartaj's library is open to you, I suggest you begin with the magic of the Vishanti. The Vishanti's power is more stable and the cost less severe. She displayed the titles, the Key of Solomon, Codex of Control, Heart of Hoggoth, basic introductory texts. Mr. Lion took the books. So you're not going to teach me directly, you want me to self-study? The Ancient One smiled. You'll learn faster by reading than by me lecturing. All right, you're probably right. He flipped through the books for a moment, then closed his eyes to absorb the information. Minutes later, he opened them, waiting for the Ancient One to quiz him. She didn't ask a single question. She simply produced more books, and then more, until the pile beside him grew tall as the sky darkened. When he reached out for the latest book she handed him, he found there were no more to take. There's nothing left, he said. He had been reveling in the flood of knowledge and wasn't ready to stop. These are my recommendations. For future study, explore as you wish. She pointed at his puzzled face. At some point, the spacious inner hall had filled with volumes, yellowed pages, and cracked spines, easily 700 or more. Are you saying I'm graduated? He asked, closing the book in his hands. The first title he saw as the pages fluttered open was The Castle of Cagliostro. I haven't taught you anything yet, the Ancient One said. Only you can be your own teacher. Then I have a lot to learn, Mr. Lion admitted, taking her meaning. The Ancient One nodded with satisfaction. She rose and opened the door. It's getting late. Get some rest. Of course, for you, it might be a good time to bask in the sun. Chapter 1, Learning Magic and then Graduating. Mr. Lion didn't go out to bask in the sun. Before he found Kamartaj, he'd already reached his limit. His one-arm lifting strength was 2.07 million tons. Even if he spent a few more years soaking up solar radiation in the Resident Evil world, any further gains would be negligible. If basking in the sun before had been like a starving man devouring a feast, doing it now was like cracking melon seeds after you're already full. Better than nothing, maybe, but a little bloating and no real benefit. Back in his room, Lion took out the sling ring the Sorcerer Ancient One had left him when she departed. The sling ring opened portals and helped connect to other dimensional realms. He sat cross-legged on the bed, slipped the ring onto his finger, and began to meditate, mentally preparing for the possibility that his first attempt to borrow power might fail. It didn't. The whole process went far more smoothly than he'd expected. Usually, using the sling ring required intense focus. Ordinary mages needed days to years to learn it. But Lion had spent his life multitasking to control various superpowers. For him, concentrating was almost effortless. His consciousness slipped into the dimensional plane as easily as a piece of meat dropped into a shark tank. The moment he arrived, countless strange, enormous awarenesses swarmed around him, all eager to sign contracts. It was like a room full of idle bankers suddenly spotting a wealthy man with proof of an oil field. They surged forward, loudly pitching their loans. Borrowing isn't a loss. Borrowing isn't a scam. If you want power, come to me. I offer low-interest, small loans. Lion welcomed them all. Any dimensional demon or god that approached got a loan contract from him, Dormammu included. He didn't plan to repay them, so he borrowed as much as he could. Besides, because of his physiology, others who might pay with a ruptured stomach or far worse for the same magic, people like Strange, cost him only a few drops of blood or a few strands of hair. To those entities, that counted as usable magical collateral. When he opened his eyes again, he formed hand seals and with a flick of his palm conjured 2 rings of Ragador. With a small change in the seals, the defensive rings of mystical light rose and reformed into an upgraded seraphim shield. It was one of Camartage's strongest orthodox defenses, the kind of shield mages used to block energy attacks in the movies. Lion switched seals again, and the shield vanished. In his hand, a golden longsword condensed, the Vishanti's sacred sword, designed to cut through dark creatures and corrupted magic. He kept practicing. One orthodox spell followed another, as if he were a grand mage who'd spent years in the craft and was merely recalling familiars out of habit. And when the well of orthodox magic ran low, he tapped into dark arts. Crossing his hands into another seal, he intentionally opened a mirror dimension. This more complex spell took a few seconds. Prism-like spatial ripples spread over Camartage like a shimmering veil. Lion stepped out of his room and threw a punch. The entire Camartage in that mirror dimension crumbled at his blow, but reality remained untouched. It was a domain like magic, a space almost identical to reality that nonetheless didn't affect the real world. He pummeled the empty reflection, increasing force until cracks appeared in the simulated space. Small mirror dimensions are easy to break, he mused. If the mirror dimension were the size of a continent, it might be harder to destroy. He stopped and moved on to dark arts, mind pollution, flesh manipulation, Dormammu dark energy. He'd already learned a surprising amount. The Sorcerer Ancient One had been an excellent teacher, even if she didn't hand him lessons directly. The books she left behind provided a full framework covering both white and dark magically aligned systems. Lion only needed to keep stacking new knowledge atop that framework to grow rapidly, and the fastest way was to read through Camartage's library. Early the next morning, Mordo stopped him on the way to the stacks. Lion, I heard from the Sorcerer Ancient One that you've been initiated. What astonishing talent! Mordo clapped his hands. I'm training the newly initiated right now. Want to join? It might speed up your mastery of the post-initiation techniques. Lion declined with a courteous nod. He didn't explain himself. He shaped a hand seal and conjured a seraphim shield. Mordo stared at the sudden wall of energy. What is that? Seraphim. But how is that possible? It's only been a day. How could you have learned this? Lion shrugged. This is the result of the Sorcerer Supreme personally giving me special tutoring. It had to have some effect, right? Mordo's eyes widened. Special tutoring? I've had special tutoring too, and it wasn't like this. Lion patted his shoulder. Perhaps your tutor wasn't quite doing it right. I won't be joining the training, Lion added. The Ancient One left me a lot of books to read. We can discuss magic later if the chance comes up. All right. Mordo watched him go, bewildered. Could it be that Superman, even his rate of learning magic, is superhuman? Mordo jogged after him with one last warning. By the way, the librarian is a new man, a bit rigid. Please be understanding. Lion gave an okay sign and continued. A few minutes later, he met the man Mordo had mentioned. Hello, I'm Wong, the man said, rising and bowing halfway. The Sorcerer Supreme instructed that you may read any book here. He was a solidly built man in his prime, with short brows, broad cheeks, and narrow, serious eyes. After the formalities, he added, "But I advise you not to start with the locked forbidden tomes. They're technically available to all mages, but few ever read them," he warned. "It's not just that they're profound and hard to understand. Forbidden books contain forbidden powers. They lead people astray." "The previous librarian was hung here by Caecilius," Wong said, voice dropping. "That traitor went astray after reading forbidden books." "I understand," Lion said. "Don't worry, I promise I won't hang you if I go astray." Wong nodded solemnly. "Good. If you can't find something, ask me." "Wait, did I mishear you just now?" Chapter 116, Chapter 1. Choose to travel to a new world to study the principles of magic. Perhaps not. Leon smiled and walked straight into the stacks. Wong, although a librarian at Camartage, would later become Sorcerer Supreme and had deep strength and experience. In the movies, after the blip, the older Wong, having become Sorcerer Supreme, joked on his resume that when he was young, he'd been a supermarket manager in Camartage for 9 years, then took over as librarian after the previous one died, and spent 11 years in the Camartage library. By that count, this period was about when he began. The younger Wong clearly didn't yet have the years of experience behind him. Faced with Leon's calm indifference, he was at a loss for words and couldn't think of any more warnings. Wong stood there with his mouth half open, helplessly watching Leon begin to browse the forbidden tomes. "I hope he keeps his promise and doesn't actually hang me," Wong muttered, not very optimistic about Leon. Half a month passed. Wong moved from constant worry, glancing at Leon frequently, to a passive acceptance, treating Leon's furious nightly page-turning as part of the library's routine. Sometimes he even wondered whether Leon was actually taking anything in, given how fast he turned the pages. Mordo, however, suffered a different kind of torment. Every day, Leon demonstrated 1 or 2 new spells to him. After more than 10 days, Mordo was thoroughly demoralized and began to question his own method of learning magic. Only when Sorcerer Ancient One took the time to counsel him did he learn the truth. The problem wasn't with his method, it was with Leon. Camartage, Inner Sanctum. "You finished all the books already?" Sorcerer Ancient One sounded surprised. Camartage's collection might not be all-encompassing, but it had accumulated over ages and was vast. She hadn't expected Leon to return so soon, asking about his next step. "More or less. Only some less useful volumes remain unread," Leon said, sipping his tea. He had read day and night and made enormous gains. His understanding of magic had skyrocketed. Even the assimilation and absorption techniques, the dark arts he had focused on at first, he had found fragments of in the forbidden texts and learned the basics. Now, if a demon or a weak dimensional demon god appeared, Leon could drain its essence and absorb it on the spot. He had actually come to take his leave. He hadn't expected his time at Camartage to end within a month. But the Sorcerer Ancient One had other guidance to offer. "Your knowledge of spells is sufficient," she said, "so you can begin studying the principles of magic." The principles of magic? Leon had never heard that Marvel-style magic required studying principles. The Sorcerer Ancient One explained slowly, "We borrow power from other dimensions to cast spells and perform the arcane arts. It looks like mastery, but we're only at the stage of using those powers. We don't understand their true essence, because everything we do is borrowed." She tapped her folding fan. "What we borrow is not just energy, but also the nature and the method by which that energy is released. What most sorcerers learn are the prescribed gestures and structures to force the borrowed energy into shape," she continued. "If the corresponding energy is absent, even with the same hand seals and circles, a sorcerer cannot release that spell. Studying the principles means discovering the essence behind a spell so it can be used with any energy." "I see." Leon finally understood. Camartage magic was odd. Besides borrowing energy, certain spells required borrowing power from specific demon gods. For example, to use Setorak's Crimson Bands, you had to draw on Setorak's power because the imprint and character of the spell come from that demon god. If you didn't use Setorak's power, even Vishanti borrowed energy wouldn't let you produce Crimson Bands. Most sorcerers never needed to study a spell's essence. Borrowing is borrowing. If it works, that's good enough. But Leon wanted continuous growth, a path to surpass the dimensional demon gods themselves. To do that, penetrating the essence of magic, being able to cast spells independently, was crucial. Where should I start? Begin with Vishanti's magic, Sorcerer Ancient One advised. They don't mind future generations probing their secrets. I understand, Sorcerer Ancient One. Thank you. Leon thanked her again, then left grinning and returned to his small room. This time, he traveled to the biochemical crisis world, using the time differential to research magical principles. When he made progress that required practice, he would return to the Marvel Universe. 3 days later, he was experimenting with the winds of Watumb in his room when Wong came knocking. Why haven't you been in the library lately? Don't get lost in forbidden knowledge. That leads to darkness. Wong had been anxious because he couldn't find Leon and assumed the worst. I'm not in the library because I finished all the books. I'm studying magical principles now, Leon said, amused. Magical principles? Like how to cast spells? Wong didn't understand. No, look. Leon waved his hands and formed a crimson Vishanti holy sword. Wong didn't immediately react. Then, taking a closer look at its energy signature, his eyes widened. Holy, crimson dimensional energy. You used Cedric's power to cast Vishanti's spell? Wong stepped back a few paces. How did you do that? Aren't you afraid of blaspheming Vishanti and suffering punishment? Don't worry, Leon shrugged. Vishanti won't punish a small sorcerer like me. You're crazy. This is madness. Stop this now. Continuing this research will only cause trouble. Wong panicked. Actually, the Sorcerer Ancient One approved it, Leon said. Are you sure? Wong was stunned. When Leon confirmed, Wong had nothing left to argue. He had to admit the Crimson Holy Sword actually looked cooler than the original. Reluctantly, Wong asked, Then, can you teach me how to do that? Leon suppressed a laugh. If you can't stop them, join them. Want to learn? He patted Wong on the back and, grinning, pushed him toward the library. Talk to me after you've finished reading all the books in Kamar-Taj. Leon's experiments inevitably caused a stir. He didn't always use the mirror dimension to conceal himself, and a few sorcerers began to notice he was researching the principles of magic. That distinctive, unfamiliar style fueled curiosity, and rumors that a prodigy had arrived in Kamar-Taj began to spread. But Leon himself remained reclusive. Another 5 days went by. Including time spent researching in the biochemical crisis world, Leon had been studying magical principles for nearly a year. On this day, he paused, not because he'd cracked everything, but because progress had slowed to a crawl. Early on, common spells were straightforward. Their essences were relatively easy to grasp. But later, abilities like the Lord of Hoggoth or the Mirror Dimension delved into laws and cosmic rules. For those ultimate spells, Leon sometimes wondered what he was even trying to research. Just the Mirror Dimension alone, if he truly understood its principle, he would be close to manipulating spatial laws directly, to reshape space or even destroy stars. His handicap was that he could only research using energy borrowed from other dimensions, which made the work extraordinarily difficult. It was like trying to clean a wall marred in graffiti without any clean water, only red, yellow, and blue dyes to work with. Under those constraints, Leon estimated it would take at least 5 years to fully grasp the Mirror Dimension's principle. Still, the Mirror Dimension's level of complexity was rare. Over the past year, he had already comprehended the principles behind most common spells. The next step would be to incorporate another internal energy source, perhaps by absorbing a weaker dimensional demon god, so he could use various magics without constraints. But Leon was reluctant to alter his soul or fuse others into himself. Such methods were a last resort. Even someone as powerful as the Sorcerer Ancient One had never used that path. After staying too long in one place, Leon decided to move. He chose to try a new world to see if he could find a suitable energy source. It's time to travel to a new world. After sending messages to Tony and the others, Leon checked Sorcerer Ancient One's approval. They exchanged a silent nod. He opened his travel search screen. Keywords: internal energy source, enhances Kryptonian genetic potential, no upper limit on extraordinary power, safe in early stages. World successfully anchored, energy required for travel, 99.999% of stamina, travel confirmed. Leon's stamina instantly plunged to 0 and he vanished from the Marvel Universe. Oh my god, I clicked too fast. With this much stamina used, what the heck am I traveling for? He cursed to the empty room. Under the cold moonlight, only Leon's regretful swearing lingered. Chapter 117, Starry Sky World. Ah, I feel like I'm going to die. As Leon sped through the void, his whole body went limp, limbs aching as if hollowed out. He hadn't felt this way since he first awakened his Kryptonian bloodline. For a moment, he was completely disoriented. When he slipped through a thin membrane and entered the new world, regaining the ability to move, he was already pale and hollow-eyed. Sun, quick, I need the sun. He opened his eyes weakly, and in the next instant, he felt a surge of strength. A massive yellow sun hung only a few 100,000 kilometers away, shining straight at him. Warm sunlight washed over his body. With a few quick beats of his heart, Leon was fully back to life. He twisted his body in a flash and immediately returned to peak condition, radiance restored. Comfortable. He stretched, muscles strong and taut, then looked again at the sun. I actually traveled right to the sun? Could the world consciousness here have thrown him straight to it? He glanced back into space and saw the familiar layout of a solar system. Hundreds of millions of kilometers beyond lay the small, battered Earth he knew so well. Earth's a little far, he thought. Even with no resistance in space, it'll take a while to get there. He wondered what kind of world this was. Such enormous energy consumption. Could it be the DC universe? Then, the world consciousness would practically be God. Sound didn't travel in space, or he would have loudly shouted for God to come greet him. Instead, a vast presence descended and linked to his mind. This time, the voice answered, "This is the original universe. I am not the world consciousness. I am the source will." That was different from the little white idiot from the Resident Evil world who couldn't even retort. Original universe? Source will? Leon stroked his chin. Sounds familiar. The source will's reply was blunt. Your level is stellar. Too weak. Leon blinked. Too weak? He'd never been told that before. Stellar level, he murmured, the realization dawning. Starry Sky World, then. This place cultivated genetic primal energy. If this was the Starry Sky World, the original universe was immense, 10 trillion light-years across in this setting. For comparison, a Marvel universe in these books was only about 100 billion light-years across. Beyond the original universe lay the even vaster Universe C, and beyond that, the Origin Continent and the chaotic Source World, whose top combat power might rival the upper layers of the Marvel power pyramid. No wonder crossing into it had required so much energy. I'm weak now, but I can become very strong later. Trust me, Source will. Leon hurried to persuade the presence. He really wanted to stay. If I grow here, I can become a true god faster and help you sooner. The Source will seemed reluctant, even dismissive. A sudden repulsive force tried to push him back out of the universe. You are incompatible with the rules, it sent at last. Come back when you become a true god. Leon couldn't help but twitch. The gap between him and a true god felt immeasurable. But his eyes lit up. This was an incredible opportunity. Being able to converse directly with the Source will in a super world like this meant endless possibilities. He pressed his advantage. The world-traveling ability had clearly opened doors. The Source will talking to a mere stellar-level being suggested potential. Don't be so quick to drive me away, he pleaded with his thoughts. Give me a chance. The Source will paused, weighing the idea. After a long interval, it finally conceded. You have 300 years. 300 years was enough to learn a great deal. Leon felt a surge of hope. Then the Source will ask another question. You are incompatible with the rules. Do you accept modification? Modification? Source modification, to make you adapt to the supreme rules. Leon didn't hesitate. He agreed. Since he had not been born here, adaptation was necessary to cultivate within this world's power system. Whatever the modification did, the chance to train in a system that allowed steady, step-by-step growth was priceless. In many other universes, Marvel included in this book, power growth tended to be sudden and chance-driven. Here, effort could yield real advancement. He accepted immediately. A vast cosmic energy materialized and poured over him. Leon was wrapped in it, the scale of the energy hard to comprehend. From Earth's perspective, the sun looked partly veiled by vast dark clouds and crackling cosmic lightning. The modification began and finished quickly, and it wasn't painful. It felt like soaking in a warm spring. Gentle currents flowed through every cell. His blood seemed to turn golden, his bones shifted and restructured. Deep in his genes, evolutionary leaps occurred. His soul felt transparent, his mind curiously calm. When he opened his eyes again, a clear message floated into his consciousness. Race, special life gene multiplier, 100. Innate abilities, clone, body of light, sunbathing evolution, temporal biofield. Too strong. Leon's excitement matched the first time he awakened his bloodline. He threw a punch and felt at least 100-fold increase in power. The modification had transformed him into a special life of this world, perfecting his genes and localizing his superpowers, while granting innate abilities like cloning and a gene multiplier of 100. Special lives were beings naturally born within the original universe. They were inherently powerful, with a minimum gene level of 100 times. They could easily approach effective immortality and were far stronger than ordinary Kryptonians. The restriction on reproduction applied only inside the original universe, a measure to prevent infinite proliferation of such powerful beings. Leave the universe, and that limitation vanished. The gene multiplier system worked like this. The basic gene strength in the starry sky world was 1. The multiplier multiplied that base strength. Each increase doubled a being's physical strength, energy capacity, and affinity for the laws, essentially a talent attribute. Leon's 100 times gene level meant his power had increased 100-fold compared to when he first crossed over. His single-arm strength had jumped from 2 million tons to 200 million tons. This was the advantage of a super universe. Even a few scraps of power leaked from the source will could cause earth-shaking changes in Leon. Having a clone was an incredibly powerful ability. In the starry sky world, cloning was a talent granted by the original universe. There were 3 clone slots in total, 1 usable at the planet, universe, and world master stages, respectively. Beings with this talent only needed a small tissue sample containing genetic material to cultivate a corresponding clone. The original protagonist, Luo Feng, had reached his peak thanks to that talent. Besides the newly acquired abilities, Leon discovered that his Kryptonian bloodline had changed dramatically. The Source Will's transformation preserved all the Kryptonian traits, but folded them into the localized rules of the starry sky world. Steel Body became the body of light, making him a child favored by the light. Suspended in the universe, he could perceive scattered points of light, the trajectories of the law of light. His biofield became a time biofield, gaining the attribute of time. Within its range, he could more easily control and comprehend the law of time. Powers like heat vision and freezing breath had been adapted to fit the starry sky world, and now existed as talents that not only increased his strength, but also affected his affinity with the cosmos. He could clearly perceive traces of the laws of time, light, fire, and water operating in the void. What surprised Leon most was his sun-bathing evolution. The Source Will had not altered it. If anything, it had strengthened it. He felt the genetic shackles that had restrained him break open. As sunlight poured down, the energy of the entire universe and the starry sky seemed to funnel toward him. His power surged almost every instant. Instinctively, Leon faced the sun and spread his arms. Countless radiations and energies rushed toward him and became nourishment. His power swelled wildly, and at a certain moment a surge focused on his chest. There, at some unknown time, a transparent rhomboid crystal wreathed in golden light had formed. Original nucleus. Leon recognized it immediately. This was the original nucleus unique to high-level beings in the starry sky world, the soul core and the seed of an inner world. It had been born during the Source Will's transformation and had opened a small inner world within itself. As soon as the original nucleus formed, it absorbed part of Leon's soul. From that moment on, unless the original nucleus was destroyed and the soul perished, even if his body shattered, he could use energy to rebuild it. Energy poured into the original nucleus, and Leon felt a new power awaken. With a mere thought, he could send that power out of his body for dozens of kilometers, and the range kept expanding. Clear images appeared in his mind wherever the power passed. Telekinesis, he realized. I've awakened telekinesis. Does that mean I also have the talent of a mental cultivator? He wondered. As more energy flowed in, his body instinctively began to cultivate the native genetic primal energy according to the rules of this universe. His immense power was being translated into the starry sky world's cultivation system. In this system, strength grows by evolving genes to form planets and galaxies within the body, eventually forming a world. The power levels are named planet, star, universe, worldmaster, and so on. In destructive terms, an ordinary cosmic level could smash a continental plate with one strike. A domain lord could raise the seas and flood a world. A worldmaster's ordinary blow could trigger mass extinction. Beyond worldmaster, punching a planet into fragments was only the start. Leon's consciousness sank into the original nucleus. Inside was a vast void like a giant dantian. Above and below hung a planet enveloped in faint light, one representing mental power, the other primal force. Leon guessed he had reached the planetary stage for both spirit and body, but his strength felt far beyond that. The two planets grew rapidly. 2, 3, 9. 9 was the limit for the planetary stage. 18 planets in total, 9 above and 9 below, rotated along a cosmic trajectory. Then they released a brilliant flash. Light and time seemed to intertwine and cheer. Boom! The planets exploded, not with flames or fragments, but with endless waves of energy, like mountains and seas rolling outward. That energy condensed and compressed until it formed scorching celestial bodies. A miniature star took shape, rotating slowly and radiating a magnetic field and heat. There was one above and one below, representing spirit and body. These were not mere energy clumps. They had star-like properties: gravity, radiation, temperature. Leon felt the star's light resonate with his Kryptonian bloodline and exclaimed inwardly, the starry sky world system and Superman were a perfect match. Cultivating a star within your body to strengthen yourself by basking in its light, he had never imagined such an illogical thing before. He used his biofield to block the external sunlight and studied how the internal star affected him. The internal star's light accelerated his absorption of cosmic energy and sped injury recovery, but it could not directly amplify his physical body nor restore depleted energy. The Kryptonian physique's response to sunlight was still abnormal and required a suitable sun. An internal star, neither yellow nor red like a real sun, had limited effect. Leon felt a little disappointed that he couldn't skyrocket just by bathing in his internal light, but he was far from unhappy. The starry sky world's cultivation path was genetic evolution. As his genetic primal energy increased, his genes optimized and his cells absorbed energy more efficiently. His Kryptonian bloodline would improve with every breath. He had stepped onto the true path of a Kryptonian Superman. His enhanced genes meant his potential rivaled that of the DC Universe's Superman. Maybe not on par with the most extreme versions, but certainly comparable to powerful incarnations like Henry Superman. The genetic primal energy also allowed his bloodline to begin its own evolutionary trajectory. Minutes passed. All of Leon's power had converted into the Devouring system, yet the internal star kept growing. Half an hour later, the second mental power star and second primal force star condensed simultaneously. He had reached the second stage of the stellar rank. Both his telekinesis and physical strength hit 400 million tons. With his genetic primal energy strengthening, his genes continued to optimize and his cultivation speed increased. At this rate, floating here and basking in the sun, he estimated he could progress one stage every half hour within the stellar rank. Abnormal. Too abnormal, Leon muttered. He explored deeper into the original nucleus and found a peculiar fluctuation leading to a world. Following it, his consciousness slipped through an entrance and the inner world unfolded before him. Inner worlds normally formed when a life form broke through to World Master and opened one with a life core. But those with an original nucleus could possess an inner world in advance, making them destined for world masterhood. Leon was different. As a special life form under the starry sky rules, reaching adulthood would automatically make him immortal. Even if he did nothing but regularly bask in the sun, he would eventually break through to immortality and attain power comparable to the highest Skyfather gods of the Marvel Universe. He wouldn't be satisfied with passive progress, though. Leon looked down at his inner world. It was a small world, 10 kilometers across in length, width, and height, land and sky contained inside. From sky to ground, it flowed with luminous, intertwining light, an embodiment of Leon's strongest law affinity, the law of light. The world belonged to him. He could draw on all its energy. This is perfect. When it grows, I'll move a yellow sun inside and bask in zero-distance sunlight whenever I want, he thought, pleased. He exited the original nucleus in high spirits. Why study magic or devour dimensional demon gods when he himself could become a dimensional demon god? He planned to enjoy this new power. The source will suddenly intervened, pouring cold water on his celebration. You do realize this transformation has a cost? It said. Leon finally understood how eager the source will was to shed him. Even passive benefits would deduct his remaining time. He hadn't planned to stay long anyway. The Starry Sky universe was vast, and time flowed differently, probably similar to the Marvel timeline. He had burned a lot of energy during the crossover. Returning to the exact moment he departed might be impossible. If he stayed for centuries, even Tony's ashes would have long since been recycled by microbes. You are here to grow stronger. I provide resources for growth, but they will be converted into time, the source will explained. All right, since I'm already at the stellar stage, I need to nurture a clone, Leon said after a moment, then shamelessly tried to bargain. Can you also give me clone material from the Nether Sea at stellar stage? You may stay another 3 years, the source will replied. That's 3 years? Fine, 3 years it is. Where's the material? You will receive it tomorrow, came the answer. Express delivery to my doorstep? Then could you also give me the second clone material? Leon pressed. I want the world trees. You don't have enough time, the source will said. Leon grumbled internally about feeling like he was trading for items in a main god space and coming up short. Then what about a tree of life? Not enough. Pick something suitable within the time limit. Large body, strong in combat power, he said. The source will relented a little. You have 3 more months. Only 3 months left. That's not even a vacation, Leon said, but he was grateful. This transformation would set his future development. He genuinely thanked the source will. He wasn't thinking of repaying it with 100 pies. Leon closed his eyes and continued to bathe in sunlight. Tomorrow he would return to Earth after receiving the 2 materials. He planned to figure out the current time period and hunt for inheritances that would help his cultivation. Chapter 119, Pregnancy. Deep within the original universe, inside a secret realm, 160 million light-years across, there was a boundless ocean. The sea itself spanned 12 light-years in diameter. Its surface shifted in color, and a dreamlike mist rose from it, as if whole worlds were being born and extinguished within the spray. Above that sea floated a middle-aged man in a long robe, simultaneously sinister and alluring. He was a god-lord of the universe divine cult, an agent of the source will, Nine Nether. Among the supreme powerhouses of the original universe, Nine Nether's true form was that vast ocean below. For a long moment his tightly closed eyes were shut, then they opened and countless laws flowed through them like constellations. You require blood sea seawater at the stellar level? He murmured to the void, though it sounded more like a conversation with an invisible, supreme presence. But my descendant's lowest cultivation is already world lord, and the poorest seawater I have on hand is cosmic level. The Nine Nether Sea, or Blood Sea, was a special life form that could only be born naturally from the universe. The descendants were the same kind of creature as Nine Nether. Cosmic level will be acceptable? Very well, esteemed source will. I understand. Nine Nether produced a single water droplet the size of several hundred meters with a gesture. How should I proceed? Shall I send it into the dark universe? Understood. Vast spatial laws surged around him. He tore open a passage to the dark universe and sent the water droplet into it, then paused briefly as if waiting for further instruction from the source will. When none came, he closed his eyes once more. If he knew that the source will had personally sought the original owner to secure a suitable drop of Nine Nether seawater, he would have been deeply moved. Meanwhile, somewhere in the void, a black giant egg, drifting aimlessly through space, was pushed by an imperceptible surge of energy toward the nearest dark universe passage. It flew into the gate. One day later, the dark passage to the dark universe ripped open the solar system without warning. 2 colossal masses, shrouded in cosmic energy, shot out and then the passage vanished as if it had never existed. Across the solar system, only one being noticed, the spatial tearing, and awoke from meditation. Laws of light and time flowed through his eyes. A full day had passed. He had advanced. Cosmic level, stage 2. The stellar within his body had transformed into a nebula. He had stepped onto the threshold of the law of light and begun to comprehend the sevenfold light domain. Such progress stemmed from his exceptional talent for law comprehension, a trait unique to certain special creatures. A domain, after all, is an aura formed when primal genetic energy, spirit, and physique merge and resonate with the external universe, an aid in combat and in approaching laws. While a ninth-level domain could let life approach and glimpse the superficial aspects of laws, his top-tier affinity for the law of light allowed him to access laws directly without relying on a domain. Even a slight fluctuation in laws from his growth enabled him to cross into their threshold. Physically, he had reached a lifting strength of 400 billion tons, the equivalent of an arm strong enough to shift the weight of Mount Tai. Terrifying to most, yet for a Superman-type powerhouse, this was still infancy. A full-grown Superman could push away an apocalypse weighing tens of trillions of tons, like in Smallville. In his home universe nation, such strength already ranked among the immortal-level elite, a place where a planet-spanning nation with tens of thousands of star systems might see no true powerhouse born for tens of thousands of years. He smiled with satisfaction. A single day of concentrated cultivation had yielded tremendous results. He had truly grown stronger by his own efforts. He followed the spatial fluctuation with enhanced vision granted by the source will. From billions of kilometers away, he saw two masses closing in near Saturn. "They're here," he said, eyes bright. He raised his right hand instinctively and traced circles in the air, ready to cast the mystic art of portals. He could now use either his primal genetic energy or the world power of his inner world to weave mystic arts. A few arcs of light flickered and then vanished. The portal technique seemed possible, but some conditions were missing. It must be a spatial rule mismatch between the two worlds, he guessed. I'll have to fetch them the old-fashioned way. He tilted his body and shot toward Saturn. Time biofield activated, time acceleration engaged. The law of light flared to speed his movement. In an instant, his speed reached sublight. He became a streak in the dark void and vanished like a ghost. 2.5 hours later, near the ringed planet, he intercepted the two glowing masses and used his primal genetic energy to dispel the protective cosmic energy. When it cleared, a 100-meter mass of scarlet seawater and a 12-meter black giant egg floated exposed. "These are my deliveries," he laughed. He contacted the source will to confirm the identity of the two objects and confirmed receipt. Then he absorbed the deep red seawater directly into his inner world. His consciousness sank into that world, which expanded as his strength grew. It measured 600 kilometers across in length, width, and height, not as vast as Luo Feng's 1,000-kilometer inner world at the cosmic level in the original records, but respectable. The deep red seawater hung at the center of his inner world. He used his world power to envelop it, and streams of information flooded his awareness. This was indeed cosmic-level seawater, perfectly matched to his realm. The source will was considerate. With a thought, he activated his innate mystic art. Clone gestation. Begin. The inner world shivered. World energy gathered like storm clouds and surged into the blood sea seawater. In an instant, the seawater evaporated, leaving only the essential genetic material suspended in the air. World power wrapped around those particles, forming a golden, egg-shaped energy sphere. Under that power, the blood sea's genetic material condensed and began to transform into a strange embryo. All that remained was to wait for the embryo to mature and hatch, the clone's gestation. Feedback arrived in his mind. Clone gestation initiated. Estimated time, 6,000 years. He frowned. This wasn't right. Luo Feng only required 600 years for a world lord-level clone, he muttered. Why is mine? Oh, my inner world is too small. In the original tale, Luo Feng's clone was tens of thousands of kilometers tall at birth, and his inner world then measured 100 million kilometers in diameter. For him, a cosmic-level blood sea clone would likely be only several hundred kilometers tall, but his inner world was only 600 kilometers across. like trying to gestate an elephant inside a lioness. If it could be born at all, that would be success. He couldn't expect rapid development. It seems I must increase my strength quickly, he told himself. Although once gestation begins, it won't fail. 6,000 years, though. That's nearly 200 times my 2 lifespans combined. I can't wait that long. Chapter 1. Another Earth at War. Leon emerged from his inner world and stared at the black, giant egg beside him. It looks like an egg from the Starry Sky Torch Beast line, but this specimen seems weak, he muttered. He only collected special life forms. But a bargain was a bargain. A minute for a minute. More than 2 years of incubation time for a Torch Beast clone wasn't a bad trade. Leon tapped the shell with his right hand and let his psychic power seep inside. Through mental imaging, he saw the embryo within. Golden horns, golden eyes, razor-like scales layered across its body, and a pair of iron-hard wings folded against its back. A Jinjiao Torch Beast, he whispered. Why is it this one? This creature was precisely the monster Luo Feng was supposed to have, the Jinjiao Torch Beast. But Leon already possessed the Jinjiao Torch Beast's most useful talent, clone, and that talent depended on the inner world and couldn't be stacked. What did he need this egg for? No wonder they only charged me 2.5 years' worth of money. They just accelerated a Jinjiao Torch Beast that was already drifting toward Earth. He had no intention of raising a second Jinjiao Torch Beast clone. It's a chicken rib, too trivial to bother with. Can I trade it? He tried to bargain with the Source Will. No. The Source Will refused. Leon called a few more times, got no answer, sighed, and tucked the giant egg into his inner world. It had been free. Keeping it was better than not. I'll hold on to it for now. It's useless as a clone slot, but maybe I can give it to Luo Feng later. Good karma, maybe. Luo Feng would become a lord-level super existence someday. The little Jinjiao Torch Beast would be nothing but a memento. 2 hours later, Leon flew from Saturn into Earth's atmosphere. Super hearing activated, and the cacophony of the entire planet streamed into his ears. His face darkened. Screams, wails, and gunfire echoed everywhere. This was not Luo Feng's era. Why is it that wherever I transmigrate, there's trouble, he thought. Above the clouds, he stopped and switched on supervision. During his last transformation, the Source Will had infused his sight with spatial attributes. Now he could see through lead. The blockage that once prevented penetration of lead was gone. He swept his gaze across the globe. 4 locations seized his attention. A tower-shaped spaceship under the Bermuda Sea, a universe battleship lying at the bottom of the Pacific, a Zerg-like hive beneath the mist of Shenangjia, and a damaged silver-white ship on Fog Island off Australia. His view moved to the continents. The 5 landmasses were shrouded in the shadow of war. Humanity's enemies were not other humans but boundless monsters. There were no scattered towns, only 23 large urban settlements, each besieged by creatures roaring from mountains, crawling from shallows, and diving from the sky. Leon caught fragments of speech giving the date, June 16, 2018. He had arrived decades too early. This was the Great Cataclysm period on the Starry Sky world's Earth. Years earlier, a virus called RR had swept the planet, causing massive deaths and triggering accelerated evolution. Under this new law, beasts had taken the lead from humans. Beginning in 2015, rapidly evolving beasts gathered and attacked cities. Monsters that laughed off conventional weapons and could keep evolving even after nuclear blasts pushed human forces back. Only when the world forged an alliance and consolidated populations into 23 strongholds did humanity manage to hold a fragile front. Everything outside those enclaves had been abandoned. Even so, humans still suffered frequent setbacks. This was the daily grind of that world's struggle against the monsters. Leon's first instinct was to help. I could save the world again, he thought. But the Starry Sky world's theme was evolution through struggle. Rescuing them outright would violate that principle. He compromised. He would eliminate every monster above Apprentice 7th rank and leave the rest to the humans. A biofield sprang into being around him. Leon's speed pushed past tens of thousands of Mach as he silently streaked between continents. Over China, twin crimson beams pierced like rain, each strike annihilating a monstrous threat. Over Europe, an invisible force plucked all beasts above 100 tons into the air and crushed them. The same method swept across the Americas and Africa. Within 30 seconds, Leon had dismantled the leading monsters worldwide. With their leaders gone, the remaining lesser beasts, lower intelligence and lower cohesion, fell into disarray. Human front lines visibly stabilized. A few planetary-level king monsters were left deliberately. Sensing danger, the monstrous tide faltered and withdrew. The humans gained a temporary respite. Leon paused by the Yangtze. Earlier, a single person of over 20 tons had been buying time for 100,000 evacuees heading toward the Jiangnan base, trading his life against a monstrous hybrid that looked part tiger, part dragon. They had been on the brink of death when Leon arrived. He watched the gatekeeper continue to escort the masses before touching down on the river's surface, casually dispatching any creature that emerged from the water. Half an hour passed. Fighter jets arrived from all directions, swarming and hovering over the riverbank. Dozens of figures, apprentice 7th rank and above, each exceeding 100 tons of power, leapt from the plains. 2 of them stood at the peak of apprentice 9th rank, approaching planetary breakthrough with strengths near 500 tons. Leon remained motionless, expression unreadable. The newcomers froze when they saw him. Pressure radiated from Leon in a steady, terrifying force. They gathered as one, silent, unable to step forward. Looking into his dark eyes felt like staring into an abyss, the sky collapsing, the earth splitting, a great beast roaring to devour them. In the starry sky world, the gap between life levels produced an instinctual physical fear. Even the steeliest wills trembled. Their bodies and souls screamed a single message. This being was a god, one glance could kill. Leon relaxed the field, cloaking himself in his biofield until he looked unremarkable. Only then did those present exhale in relief and exchange nervous glances. Finally, a cold-faced man with a buzz cut in black clothes and a rough, bald man in a tight suit stepped forward. "This respected strong one," the cold-faced man said, bowing. "Thank you for your intervention.